There was a new poll out from Public Affairs Council and Morning Consult. And what this poll found was that while the news media is trusted as a primary source for what's going on, 46% of Americans say they trust the news media, 71% of Americans said that they trust their friends and neighbors as a source of media more than the news media, 71%. Now, what that means is that you, as a Free Speech TV viewer, are well informed on what's going on, far more so than the average person. So you have an opportunity now to be the news source for your friends, your neighbors, your family, whether it's on Facebook or talking to people at the store or your next door neighbors or whatever it may be. And you have an opportunity to let them know about this great news source here, Free Speech TV. Tell them how they can find it. You can go to freespeech.org. You can find all the places where people can watch Free Speech TV. Thank you. Our book today is Future War, Preparing for the New Global Battlefield by Robert, I believe it's pronounced Latif, L-A-T-I-F-F. This is from the introduction. On a sweltering August day following weeks of heightened tension with Russia over its actions in Ukraine and Syria, and harsh words between the United States and China over actions in the South China Sea, and as workers are preparing to depart the cool of their air-conditioned Manhattan office buildings for the gridlocked highways and subways, Several large electric power plants along the East Coast simultaneously experienced dramatic overspeed conditions in their large turbine generators. Plant operators are unable to stop the steam turbines, whose automatic control and data systems have been infected by sophisticated computer malware, and they catastrophically tear themselves apart, cutting power to large segments of the population and industries in the Northeast. Building systems shut down, hospitals switch to emergency generators, trains stop running, traffic lights cease operating, and Wall Street trading comes to a halt. At the same time, 1,100 miles to the south, a massive rocket sits fueled and ready to launch a critical national security satellite when an explosive-laden private aircraft flies at low altitude into the Cape Canaveral launch pad area and, despite repeated warnings, slams into the pressurized fuel tank and solid rocket motors, creating an enormous conflagration. Half a world away, elite commandos equipped with the latest high-technology equipment but unidentifiable as a national army attack U.S. and allied interests near areas of disputed territory. Thus are fired the opening shots of a new war. These hypothetical events represent a radically different style of conflict fought with new tools and against new and unfamiliar enemies. When most people think of war, they imagine soldiers doing battle with other soldiers, employing tanks, artillery, and other recognizable weapons. However, in this century, war has morphed into something we can scarcely recognize, and future conflicts will be qualitatively and quantitatively unlike those of the past. They will be fought using innovative and unusual weapons, many of which, because the technologies have both civilian and military uses, will be available to far more people who are far less skilled in their employment. The so-called democratization of technology has diminished the monopoly of advanced countries on the tools of war. 21st century armed conflicts often have no battlefield in the traditional sense. The concept of opposing armies clashing in deadly struggle but moderated by international conventions of behavior seems a thing of the past. In 1999, Chinese colonels Kuo Liang and Wang Shuangshui predicted that soldiers would increasingly be computer hackers, financiers, drug smugglers, and agents of private corporations rather than members of a military, and that their weapons would include not only airplanes, cannons, poison gas bombs, and biochemical agents, but also computer viruses, net browsers, and financial derivative tools. Their predictions were prescient. Yesterday's wars were, like World War II, about saving civilized nations from maniacal dictators, or like the conflicts in Vietnam and Korea, devoted to a clash of ideologies in the attempt to limit the spread of one hegemon over another. They were big affairs involving large military forces and enormous violence. Today's wars are more about cultural and religious hatreds, using violence as a means to change the hearts and minds of people, among whom the killing occurs with more frequency. Tomorrow's wars will be different still, fought largely for political dominance with stealth and cunning, targeting innocents and institutions, heavily dependent on information superiority, and employing strange new weapons. While we have a highly motivated and well-trained and equipped armed forces that will adapt, we are not prepared as a nation to react well to the inevitably messy and ambiguous situations these new conflicts and weapons will present. We still have no clear idea of what constitutes an act of war in cyberspace now, nor of how we might respond to such an act. It is not enough for the military to be prepared. Neither the public nor its decision makers have yet fully comprehended the significance of the changes in the types of conflict and the tools with which they will be fought. Without question, there will be circumstances when decision makers will find it necessary, or at least think it necessary, to send soldiers into classic boots-on-the-ground combat situations. We will continue to project force with our powerful aircraft, our munitions, and our aircraft carrier strike groups. When war is fought in foreign lands, it could well be against other high-tech armies. However, war will increasingly be more personal and often fought closer to home. It will not lend itself to the traditional massive displays of U.S. firepower. It will affect individuals directly, not as some distant conflict we read about in newspapers or watch in the movies or on the internet. Americans will be targeted on U.S. soil, often, as we have seen in San Bernardino and Orlando, by homegrown terrorists. This form of war will be messy and complex, and it will not lend itself to easy, quick, soundbite solutions. It may not even be clear for a while who perpetrated the violence against us. Was it state-sponsored or a random act of terror? Will we unleash massive destruction on foreign countries in retaliation for attacks by terrorists residing on our own soil? If so, to what end and with what consequences? There are always consequences, whether they be the death or capture of our own troops, unnecessary civilian casualties, or the incitement of more violence. The book Future War by Robert Latif. You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on
Thom Hartmann Program.
Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you. The first vote of two has happened. This was a vote to end debate in the United States Senate over whether or not Judge Kavanaugh should be, whether there should be a vote to put Judge Kavanaugh on the Supreme Court. And the way the Senate works, you've got the period of debate, and then you got to vote to end the debate, and then you've got to you have to file for cloture. This is what Mitch McConnell did Wednesday night, and then 30 hours later, I believe it is, you can have the cloture vote, which was this morning, and then 30 hours after that, you can have the general vote, which will be tomorrow, probably around 5 or 6 p.m. And the cloture vote this morning, Susan Collins, Jeff Flake, Joe Manchin, Lisa Murkowski. Lisa Murkowski was the only no vote for cloture. Now, the thing to remember is that on the legislation that would have destroyed the Affordable Care Act, that, to this day, Donald Trump is PO'd with John McCain about, that legislation to destroy the Affordable Care Act, when the cloture vote was held, the closed debate vote, John McCain voted yes. But then at the very last minute on the actual vote, he did a thumbs down. He said no, and he blew the whole thing up. Jeff Flake could still do this, although he has now told at least one news organization that in all probability, unless something big happens between now and tomorrow night, he's going to be voting yes, Jeff Flake. Now, that something big could be that, enough of us reach his senatorial switchboard at 202-224-3121. Same for Susan Collins. Same for Joe Manchin. We don't know how Joe is going to vote. He would be the only Democrat voting now that Heidi Heitkamp has said no. I'm not gonna vote for this. So it's fascinating what's going on. By the way, it's Anything Goes Friday. Whatever you'd like to talk about, 202-808-9925. The thing that I think is most interesting about all of this, that what's going on right now, the whole zeitgeist, the whole thing around Brett Kavanaugh, is what's happening over on Fox News. This I find absolutely fascinating. Chuck Grassley this morning floated a conspiracy theory about on Fox Business 90 minutes before Donald Trump tweeted something absolutely outrageous, and this conspiracy theory that Chuck Grassley floated was that George Soros is paying the demonstrators who are outside his office. A wealthy Jew, right? I mean, that's how, that's the subtext whenever George Soros' name is invoked. Because, I mean, compared to the Koch brothers, he does in 1 year what the Koch brothers do in an afternoon in terms of, funding and coordination and everything else. But Laura Ingraham tweeted, "Soros strikes again." This was last week. She's with Fox News. That was after Jeff Flake was confronted in the elevator. And then this morning, Trump, or maybe it was October 5th. Yeah, it was this morning. Trump tweets that the very rude elevator screamers are paid professionals only looking to make senators look bad. Now, this is echoing what Chuck Grassley had said on Fox 90 minutes earlier. "Don't fall for it," Trump tweets. Also, look at all of the professionally made identical signs paid for by Soros and others. Those are not signs made in a basement from love. I think you could say the same thing about all the Trump signs that are held at his rallies. But, and these may well, be signs that are being made in D.C. by some sign maker. Who knows? But so what? But the thing that's really interesting is that Trump goes all anti-Semitic. Ben Shapiro over on Fox News, he says, I wasn't aware that Brett Kavanaugh forfeited his presumption of innocence or due process of law simply because of the color of his skin. Say what? What does this have to do with race? Oh, there's two black people on the Senate Judiciary Committee, Kamala Harris and Cory Booker. Is that what this is all about? Apparently over at Fox News, it is. Amanda Marcotte writing in Salon today. If you flip on Fox News these days, you'd think the battle is largely about race and that the white men are being subject to false rape allegations to perpetuate some sort of anti-white oppression. Tucker Carlson said on Fox, you might wonder what in the world this story, the Kavanaugh story, has to do with race. And then he answers his own question. He says it's about punishing everyone who looks like Brett Kavanaugh. In other words, let's get the white guys. Apparently, you know, an effort being led by Dianne Feinstein, you know, a white person, but, you know, go figure. Martha McCallum on Fox News wondered if Kavanaugh should say, I'm not guilty because I'm just because I'm a white guy. You know, Ben Shapiro, the quote I just gave you, and all of this seems to have followed on Ann Coulter. She apparently was the one who started all this. She said, white privilege means that any white male can be accused with evidence-free accusations like this. But Tucker Carlson in particular, Amanda Marcotte writes, is embracing the opportunity to use Kavanaugh's skin color to convince white middle-class and working-class Americans to align themselves with essentially the Koch brothers, with the money to lead, the billionaire class, against people of color, even though these working-class white people share the same economic concerns with the people of color. Carlson was even shameless enough, she writes, to characterize a crowd that booed Senator Lindsey Graham for his defense of Donald Trump as waging a revolution against the working class, in quotes. So Donald Trump, the billionaire who inherited $413 or scammed $413 million from his dad, is the representative of the working class in America and actual working class people who are out there protesting. No, not so much. Anyhow, there's a lot of other stuff in the news. Well, actually, let me just share this with you real quickly. I mentioned yesterday the Indiana feticide law. Indiana is one of two states with these bizarre laws. It's been on hold for a couple of years by a federal judge, so it's not in place right now. But before the federal judge put it on hold, most people have probably forgotten the story. This is from the spring of 2015 of Purvi Patel. Now, in 2013, January 2013, January 14th, 2013, in fact, Mike Pence was sworn in as governor of Indiana. In late July of that same year, Purvi Patel, this is from Esha Pandit, writing over at Salon. In late July of that same year, Purvi Patel went to the hospital in pain. This is I'm pretty sure this is a woman of Indian ancestry, bleeding heavily after a miscarriage. The doctor who saw her suspected she had induced an abortion and called the police. When Patel woke up after sedation, there was a police officer standing by her bed, and the anti-choice doctor had left the hospital to go in search of the fetus. And sure enough, they found one. And despite hospital tests showing no traces of any abortifacient in her blood work, the state of Indiana charged her with both feticide for allegedly inducing an abortion and child neglect for allegedly having a premature baby. So that was in, you know, this originally happened the same year that Pence was sworn in. And then the next year, that was 2013, 2014, she's arrested. In March of this year, then, this from this piece in Salon, Pence signed a law prohibiting women from obtaining an abortion because of race or the gender or disability of the fetus, making Indiana the second state in the nation to do this. This has scared the hell out of people of color, because you could now say to a woman who is not Caucasian that who had a miscarriage that she had actually tried to induce that because she had a child who was a person of color. She was trying to induce an abortion based on race, and she basically has no defense. I mean, this is what happened to Purvi Patel. In fact, Purvi Patel had numerous text messages with a friend of hers talking about how she was afraid to go to the doctor because, you know, she didn't know what would happen. So anyhow, a federal judge blocked this law, but but you know what happened then on March 30th was 33-year-old Purvi Patel was sentenced to 20 years in prison. She had been facing a 70-year sentence under Mike Pence's laws in Mike Pence's Indiana. 70-year sentence. They sentenced her to 20 years in prison for this miscarriage. She was sentenced actually to 30 years. 10 years was suspended. And then they had also a 6-year sentence on the feticide charge that overlapped that. Now, since then, she has gotten out. I believe this sentence has been reversed, in fact, or at least is on hold. But I mean, this is the world that Brett Kavanaugh would have us live in. This is the world that Mike Pence and now Donald Trump would have us live in. Donald Trump, who laughed with Howard Stern about how when his second wife was his girlfriend and he got her pregnant, Marla Maples, he discussed with her whether or not she should have an abortion, and she decided that she wanted to have the baby, and thus Tiffany. So, you know, that is like right up at the top of the list of the stakes in this debate. Although everybody's framing it about whether Christine Blasey Ford should be believed, and obviously, you know, she should be, and whether the FBI should be doing an investigation into that, and yes, they should have, and yes, the White House blocked that from happening. But there are other things on the docket. I mean, you know, we're looking at the end of Roe v. Wade, among other things. We're looking at the end of possibly Medicare and Social Security and the Environmental Protection Agency, if Kavanaugh believes that they're all unconstitutional.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Because the Federalist Society generally, or at least the people associated with it, generally take that position that these things are unconstitutional. And now there will be 5 Federalist Society people on the court. And welcome back. Marta in Big Bear Lake, California, listening on KPFK. Hey, Marta, what's on your mind today?
Well, I just want to say that this is not about sex or boys will be boys. It's not a woman's issue. My brother at age 9 and his 8-year-old friend were molested. My brother told me my brother would not be believed by Joe Manchin and Susan Collins, even though I'm a witness because he told me. He never recovered. Thousands of boys who came forward as men to say that priests had molested or raped them would not be believed. I think Joe Manchin and Susan Collins need to pay a price. This is not a crime of sex. It's a crime of violence and dominance.
Yeah. We'll see how Joe Manchin votes. But I agree. And I think that and thank you, Marta, for that. And I think that the Manchin is in a real weird position. If he votes yes, he gets nailed by Democrats. You know, they just won't show up and vote for him. If he votes no, he gets nailed by Republicans in a state that overwhelmingly went for Trump. But we all forget that state overwhelmingly also went for Bernie. This is why I think Joe Manchin is the wrong guy for West Virginia. West Virginia needs a genuine progressive Democrat. So, you know, if this takes down Joe Manchin, I'm not sobbing about that. Elizabeth in Brookville, Ohio. Hey, Elizabeth, what's on your mind?
I just want to say that this makes a mockery, the Kavanaugh situation makes a mockery of the American justice system. Here we have Bill Cosby, an 82-year-old man who's sent to prison for sexually exploiting women and doping them. And we're sending Kavanaugh, who did the same thing, to the United States Supreme Court. We had Wesley Snipes, who went to prison for tax evasion for crumbs compared to what our president, Donald Trump, committed. Donald Trump went to the White House, and Wesley Snipes went to prison.
Yeah.
Tiger Woods lost endorsements, and he lost his standing in the world golfing environment because he cheated on his wife. We have Donald Trump as president of the United States, who had a sexual relationship with other women, including a porn star, who is always being tarnished by these so-called upright religious standing folks in America, when Donald Trump had sex with her. So we tarnish her, but we give Donald Trump, a good handshake and call him the good old boy.
Yeah.
We have football athletes who are discharged from football, lose their standings, lose money for battering their wives and sexually exploiting women. No evidence, all based on he says, she says. And you have Donald Trump and other so-called upstanding white people who get away with nothing. The list goes on and on.
Yeah. Brett Kavanaugh, you could add into that last one, Elizabeth. Elizabeth, thank you. Very well said, and it is a striking contrast. Thanks a lot for the call. We'll be right back. Welcome back. It's 22 minutes past the hour. Donald in Aurora, Illinois. Hey, Donald, what's on your mind? Thanks for listening to WCPT.
Yes. Hi, Tom. You might probably disagree on some of the stuff I'm going to say. There's got to be term limits on these Supreme Court justices.
I agree.
This position now is being abused. And not only that, there is it being abused, they're no longer being appointed, as non-partial people that are going to work on the behalf of the American people or the Constitution. They are becoming they are literally being in there for an extension of the very party that appoints them. This is nonsense. Yeah. And for them to have a lifetime commitment until they hit the graveside is crazy too. No, 15 or 20 years most, that's what they should serve. And maybe even put an age limit on that, like 75 years of old, like you would do with a tire when you buy one. And the thing is, too, they also should do something about our voting rights. They shouldn't wait. If they get the House and the Senate, our Democrats, they should not waste any time with trying to go after the Republicans. Try to do everything you can to save our voting rights, because that, no matter what you do, that is the thing. We've had elections stolen from us and everything. Get rid of that. Citizens United, that gerrymandering of districts, that electoral college, and have open and free elections, and also get rid of the I think D-Bolt machine. Wasn't that an appointed?
Yes, and we're going to have a conversation in about 8 minutes now with Mimi Kennedy about that very issue.
I don't know. Could they do something about it? If they can all gather together and work together and getting a machine that somebody works for and use paper ballots, no more of this stuff. Open and free elections, the kind that we send our soldiers to go die for in other countries.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I get it, and I agree. And these are all very, very large issues, Donald. Thank you very much for the call. Tony in Los Angeles. Hey, Tony, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I just called to say, white folks, some of y'all are having a black experience right now.
Okay, how so?
In the sense that, you'll never know what we truly feel, but what I'm saying is a lot of progressive white folks are starting to see the racism that we've been dealing with forever.
Oh, yeah.
Just how far white people, racist white people will go to keep what they have. Yeah, it's pretty shocking that, Fox News is turning this all into Kavanaugh's under assault because he's a white guy. And, it's just breathtaking. Well, it's not surprising to me. Everything is about race in this country. Let's be totally honest.
Yeah, at the end of the day. Yeah.
And for them, when they see they're losing or whatever, because you couldn't help but know that woman was not lying. So it's this cognitive dissonance. You have to fix it in your mind that, I can't really believe this woman, Professor Ford. Let's make it about the race thing. The race thing always works. So let's take it back there, and then people will be pissed, and then they'll vote accordingly, and then there you go. So then that way, just like those women that confronted Senator Flake, Come on now. Anybody with half of a brain cell knows what those women were saying was true and should believe them. But the fact that you can just disregard that for no other reason other than just sticking with your party and sticking with being white.
Well, the big and the big, if I may, the big issue here, in my opinion, is that the levers of power, the machine of power, the FBI, did not investigate. Did not talk to any of the corroborating witnesses. They refused to actually investigate these allegations. They refused to interview Dr. Ford or Brett Kavanaugh, and that tells me that this is not just some crazy judge or crazy congressional panel. This is a demonstration of the machinery, the institutional machinery
of white supremacy.
Yep.
Back to my
well, in this case, male supremacy too.
Okay, and the fact of the matter is, you never had a pre-dawn raid on the Klan like you did the Black Panthers when they were just trying to feed some kids and protect themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's the extent to which, that's what I'm saying, white supremacy goes, that white people better wake up and see. Okay, because the time is up. It's just done.
Yeah.
And people of color got to go. I just feel like I'm done. I've voted. I've done it all, and then my vote still is suppressed. What am I going to keep voting for?
Well, don't give up, Tony. Please don't give up. We need your vote. We need all of our votes. I mean, that is exactly what the Koch brothers and Chuck Grassley and Donald Trump want, is for Democrats not to vote, to get discouraged, to say, okay, what the hell, they beat me. We've got to fight back. Tony, thank you for the call. Trenchant observation. 28 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's Talk Media for the rest of us, the Thom Hartmann Program, the place where smart people get their news. Our book today is Cyber War, How Russian Hackers and Trolls Helped Elect a President, by Kathleen Hall Jamieson. This is from the introduction. Imagine a strategy memo forecasting cyber attacks by Russian hackers, trolls, and bots designed to roil social discontent and damage the electoral process of a major party U.S. presidential nominee. Or, if she winds up winning, sabotage her ability to govern. Guaranteed payoff, no fingerprints, no keystroke record, no contrails in the cloud. To ensure that Americans would believe that disparaging messages about her were made in the U.S., use Bitcoin to buy space and set up virtual private networks on American servers. Distribute hacked content stolen from the accounts of her staff and associates through an intermediary, WikiLeaks. Use identity theft, stolen social security numbers, and appropriated IDs to circumvent Facebook and PayPal's demand for actual names, birth dates, and addresses. On platforms such as Instagram and Twitter, register under assumed names. Diffuse and amplify your attack and advocacy through posts on Facebook, tweets and retweets on Twitter, videos on YouTube, reporting and commentary on RT, blogging on Tumblr, news sharing on Reddit, and viral memes and jokes on 9gag. Add to the mix a video game called Hiltendo, in which a missile-trading Clinton figure vaporizes classified emails sought by the FBI. Employ online agitators and bots to upvote posts from imposter websites such as blackmattersus.com to the top of such subreddits as r/TheDonald and r/Hillary for Prison. Drive content to trend. To maximize the impact of your handiwork, use data analytics and search engine maximization tools built into social media platforms. To test and fuel doubts about the security of U.S. voter information, hack the electoral systems of the states. And throughout the primary and general elections season, seed the notion that if Hillary Clinton were to win, she would have done so by rigging the election, an outcome that would repay her assaults on the legitimacy of their leader's presidency with doubts about her own. Were she instead to lose, she would no longer be a thistle in the toned torso of the hackers and trolls' boss's likely boss. Every result but one produces a desirable outcome for the Kremlin. Outcome 1, Clinton is off the international stage. Outcome 2, she wins but can't govern effectively. Outcome 3, the former Secretary of State is elected and the country simply moves on, but the sabotage nonetheless has magnified cultural tensions and functions as a pilot from which to birth later success, perhaps when she runs for a second term. The only eventuality that damages the Russian cyber soldiers and their commander-in-chief is the fourth, in which, in real time, the cyber attackers are unmasked by a vigilant intelligence community, condemned by those in both major political parties and around the world, characterized by the media as spies and saboteurs. The Russian message is blocked or labeled as Russian propaganda, and when included in media accounts, the stolen content is relentlessly tied to its Russian origins and sources. None of that, however, happened. Instead, to the surprise of the Russian masterminds, as well as both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, he won the Electoral College, and with it a 4-year claim on 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Although countrywide she bested him by almost 2.9 million votes, he unexpectedly captured an Electoral College majority by running the table. By the end of the evening of November 8th, Florida, as well as Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, were in his column. The ways in which Russian hacking and social media messaging altered the content of the electoral dialogue and thus contributed to Donald Trump's victory are the subjects of this book. To begin my exploration, this overview chapter will highlight key findings of the U.S. intelligence community, preview my focus on the hackers and trolls and the synergy between them, justify casting the Russian machinations as acts of cyber war, outline ways in which susceptibilities in our system of government and media structures magnified their effect, and note 5 presuppositions that will shape my analysis of the Russian trolls' work, and one that will guide my study of the effects of the hackers. Forming the backdrop for my inquiry are 3 reports on the Russian intervention in the 2016 presidential election. The October 7, 2016 statement jointly issued by the Department of Homeland Security and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence on Election Security. The January 2017 conclusion of the U.S. intelligence agencies, CIA, FBI, NSA, and the February 2018 Robert Mueller indictment of 13 of the Russians allegedly behind the social media intrusions. On a day that will live in campaign lore, as much for what didn't happen as what did, more on that in a moment, the first of the 3 revealed the following. The U.S. intelligence community is confident that the Russian government directed the recent compromises of email from U.S. persons and institutions, including the U.S. political organizations. The recent disclosures of alleged hacked emails on sites like DCLeaks.com and WikiLeaks and by the Guccifer 2.0 online persona are consistent with the methods and motives of Russian-directed efforts. These thefts and disclosures were intended to interfere with the U.S. election process. Such activity is not new to Moscow. The Russians have used similar tactics and techniques across Europe and Eurasia, for example, to affect public opinion there. We believe, based on the scope and sensitivity of these efforts, that only Russia's senior-most officials could have authorized these activities. That's from the report. The next report put a name to one of those senior-most officials and specified an intended beneficiary, Donald Trump. Cyber War is the book.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
And on the line with us is Mimi Kennedy, the actress, activist, writer, board chair of Progressive Democrats of America, PDAmerica.org, star of the hit series Mom on CBS, PDAmerica.org, the website. Mimi Kennedy, LA is her Twitter handle. Mimi, welcome back to the program.
Tom, I'm so glad to be back on the program with you. Hi.
Hi. It's great to have you with us. So, the last time you were on, we were talking about ballot images, that some of these electronic voting machines actually capture an image of the vote, which could be used for an audit, just like a paper trail. And apparently, one of the groups that is promoting this is being sued, Audit USA, or has been threatened with a lawsuit from one of the voting machine companies. What's going on here?
They got what's called a threat letter. Seems to be the litigious bullying society. But what they've threatened is to take Audit USA to court if they don't take off their website the manual that shows election officials how these ballot images can be saved. It's just a choice on the menu. Many election officials, John Brakey found as he went across the United States trying to get people to save their ballot images, they didn't know it existed. They're like, well, we didn't read the manual and we don't know. There's a lot of county election officials that have not been digitally trained or technically trained. So this was part of a citizen education. Here's the manual. Here's what we're talking about. And ES&S is going, no, it's our copyright. But you can't do anything. It's not the code. You can't do anything with a manual unless you have the machine right there. Only the election offices have the machine. And ES&S isn't telling their counties that these ballot images exist. So it seems like a threat. Oh, my God, you're trying to make us transparent. You can't. You citizens, shut up. Go away. No, we're going to count the vote, and as Stalin said, it's who counts the vote. So I guess the ES&S is on Stalin's side.
Yeah, so we have two issues here. One is the millions of people who are being illegitimately, incorrectly, inaccurately, or perhaps accurate because they were targeted because they were young, old, or a minority, a racial minority, who are being thrown off the voting rolls all across the United States in an effort that has been championed by Donald Trump and Chris Kobach. And then at the same time, we've got, even if you do end up voting, if your name hasn't been purged from the voting list, you may well be voting on a machine that could be doing anything to your vote.
Anything to your vote. And that's the trouble with untransparent digital counting. And fraction counting, as we know. We've done fraction magic and talked about how it's undetectable. But the ballot images are a means of audit. And interestingly, Tom, because the Help America Vote Act had some language about, well, it has to be auditable in case, pro challenge. So ballot images were sort of included and talked about by the vendors as well. We have a picture of every ballot we scan, so you could look at those. And now they're hiding them. Also, I want to caution people. The Republicans are trying to go, oh, ballot images, great. Now that you want those, let's make those the only audit mechanism. Let's never go to the paper ballots. And that's not cool because you could duplicate, you could mess with ballot images digitally. And if you never connected them to their paper source by some sort of percentage, let's connect and see if all these ballot images are really from their source. That would be a percentage audit.
Right.
Do both. You can't just do it by device.
Right.
Federal legislation went down.
And then the third issue is how vulnerable are our election systems, and this would include our voting registration rolls, to hacking. And we know that, at least according to the FBI, that the Russians have hacked into the voting systems and the registration rolls of numerous states now. And according to Trump, the Chinese have done the same thing. And there's some evidence that other countries as well have, Iran specifically, have penetrated, and North Korea have penetrated our voting systems. So what's being done about all these things, Mimi Kennedy?
Well, two federal legislations failed because really our elected officials are scared to tell election offices what to do, our elected officials. So here's my solution and what I'm trying to message. We, each of us voters, we have to protect our own vote. So here's what I'm telling people to do. Go to your Secretary of State, check your registration. In your registration, check if it's not right, if anything's wrong, or if you're not there, call the number there or go down to your office and make sure you're registered. Don't depend on somebody canvassing. You got to go down to the office. And you want to do it online soon because later they're going to go, oh, you weren't on the rolls because you registered too late. We were backlogged. Number two, if your registration shows that you're a vote-by-mail voter, make sure that you get that vote-by-mail ballot and either vote it and send it in early so it's in election night returns, because anything coming in too near to election night won't be processed and won't be in election night returns. You need to vote the ballot, or if you prefer to vote at the polls, you got to bring that ballot in and surrender it unvoted, or they won't give you a ballot because they'll assume you used it and you're voting twice. Then you'll vote provisional. Don't get in the provisional batch. It's bad in every state. Right. You need to be in the regular ballot batch. So you got to check your registration, note your vote by mail status, take care of either getting the damn ballot. Don't go, well, I didn't get it and I want to vote. They'll go, well, you can't vote. You're going to vote provisional. You got to make sure that you tell the office, I haven't gotten my ballot and I want it. You also need to take a screenshot of your registration and maybe print it out and take it to the polls, because they might tell you, well, you're not here. And you can say, yeah, well, I was here. This is not my fault. Somebody's gotten into your voter rolls. These ways of protecting ourselves can either actually protect us and get us a regular vote at the polls. Certainly obeying all the rules will do that. If you've been purged, these methods will start to create a lot of people who did this and going, something is really wrong. And then we have more evidence so that we don't hear, there's no evidence. It only happened to you. And people feel ashamed. They walk away going, oh, it's made to vote provisional. I don't know why. Well, here's why. They might be gaming you. So stay out of the game and take a screenshot of that registration and know you were on the rolls. And if you're not on the rolls, register now. It's I think there's still a window of opportunity in most states. Don't wait, because they will say, oh, these young people didn't know, and they registered late and it backlogged and we don't have them on the rolls. Right. Provisional, though, that's cool. It's not cool. So protect yourself. We have to protect ourselves. Now it's down to that.
There you go. Mimi Kennedy with Progressive Democrats of America, pdamerica.org, and just this extraordinary work that you've been doing for years and years on this issue of voter integrity. Mimi, thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom.
It's great talking with you. It's always great having you with us.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks a lot. Back to picking up your phone calls here. Mike in Lomita, California, listening on KPFK. Hey, Mike, what's up?
Hey, Tom, I just wanted to refute a claim apparently made by a caller yesterday that the Episcopal Church is some sort of reactionary cabal just because Judge Gorsuch and presumably Mike Pence are members.
Okay.
Yeah, in the first place, Mike Pence, as far as I can determine, went straight from a very devout Roman Catholic to a very devout megachurch evangelical, and has never associated himself with the Episcopal Church.
Right.
And the church itself officially has opposed the death penalty for some time now, supported civil rights, affirmative action, full equality for gay people. In fact, they have the first gay bishop, openly gay bishop.
Yeah, Mr. Robinson. That was about 10 years ago, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. And other notables include Teddy Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, Vice President Henry Wallace. Did I mention Senator Whitehouse? So the claims about the political status of the church are way off. In fact, the Pew search of the pews found that Episcopalians tend about 49% to 39% to favor Democrats. So they're on the left side of the spectrum overall.
Okay, so the church has been defended. Mike, thanks a lot for the call. It's for the record. Good to know these things. Jerry in Phoenix, Arizona. Hey, Jerry, it says here you're very upset with me. What about what?
Yeah, hi, Tom. Thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
I get upset with you when you make statements like you did earlier about Joe Manchin and about how you would not shed a tear if Joe Manchin did not win re-election in West Virginia.
That was not the essence of my point. The essence of my point was that if you look at the West Virginia vote, and that in the Democratic primary, it was overwhelmingly for Bernie Sanders. I mean, Bernie Sanders carried West Virginia by more than 20 points over Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
And he would have wiped out Donald Trump in the general election. The voters of West Virginia were when they voted for Donald Trump, they weren't voting for a Republican. They were voting for an outsider, and they were voting for the progressive parts by and large that he was promising. He was promising to strengthen Social Security, to strengthen Medicare, to get us out of crazy wars, to stop trade policies that are shipping our jobs overseas. He made all these promises that have been typically Democratic promises. Joe Manchin has been this guy in the middle. He's basically been taking the positions that the Republicans did back in the 60s and 70s, and that the Democratic Party is largely left behind. And if it turns out that Joe Manchin, because of this vote, ends up not getting reelected. I think he's up for reelection in 2 years. No, he's up for election this cycle.
This year.
If he ends up losing his seat, that would be a disaster because we have a Republican for the next 6 years from West Virginia. But if what that means is that 6 years from now he has a primary challenger and a progressive takes him on, I think that progressive will win. That was my point.
Okay. Yeah, but here's the thing, Tom. I mean, and I remember, because I've been listening to you for many, many years, and I remember the same attitude towards Blanche Lincoln in Arkansas and Mary Landrieu down in Louisiana.
And they are now gone, and it's not because of me.
They're both gone.
It's because they were. It's because they were conservatives. The nation is over it with the conservatives. I mean, my
opinion is no. I mean, we need to have every Democrat, because I'd rather have a Joe Manchin or a Mary Landrieu or Blanche Lincoln who are going to vote along with Democrats 80% of the time than some Tea Party Republican who's not going to vote along with us any.
I agree, and I'm not calling on West Virginians to vote for the Republican opposite Joe Manchin. What I am saying, though, is I think that this vote, no matter, and the main point of what I was saying is Joe is damned if he does and damned if he doesn't, because right now he has to depend on a lot of Trump voters to get himself reelected, and those people increasingly are calling themselves Republicans and watching Fox News, and they're not going to be inclined to vote for him. And if he throws them, if he's the guy who pushes Kavanaugh over the top, I frankly doubt that there's going to be enough Republican voters, Trump voters in West Virginia to reelect Joe Manchin based on that when his Democratic base deserts him because of that vote. And on the other hand, if he votes against Brett Kavanaugh, joins the other Democrats, that's going to, satisfy the Democratic base. But he has failed to energize the Democratic base because, he's not even remotely a progressive. So he's in this terrible situation of his own making.
I'm in a fairly red state down here in Arizona, not as deep red as West Virginia, but I can tell you I don't think would win down here.
You don't think that Joe Manchin would win down there?
A Joe Manchin type would win down, not a Bernie Sanders.
We don't know. I mean, you just don't know, Jerry, and you won't know until somebody like that is on the ballot. You look at the issues, and 70 to 80% of all Americans are actually with us on these issues. Jerry, thank you for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls in just a minute here on Anything Goes Friday. And welcome back. Bob in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, watching us on Free Speech TV. Hey, Bob, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Good day to you.
Hello, Bob.
Oh, I think the two-party system, and it's more than just a two-party system, but the system creates these hybrid monsters of the two parties that would have a foot in the other party. It's nuts. But what I wanted to say is, a lot of these people with this appointment of the judge and so forth and so on, a lot of these people are addicted to power. They are addicted to power as if it was a drug, and it's supported by the alcohol industry, keeping a lot of people out here who are half informed, half drunk. So the brain doesn't function. It never has time to function because the people are too busy trying to make a living to feed their kids, pay their bills, hang on to what little property they might happen to own, with little time to do anything on their property to create another sort of economy.
So your point, Bob.
Created as we speak.
So therefore,
addiction to power. So therefore, people need to speak up when they have a chance to speak up, and have a microphone and have the capacity within themselves to speak up about what sustainability looks like. What does it look like 10 years down the road? These people have 40-year plans. While scientists tell us we may not have that long. We got a plan anyway, but what are you planning for?
Yeah.
You plan on throwing everybody into prison?
I get it, Bob, and I'm with you, and I think that, and thank you for the call. We definitely do need to be talking about sustainability and those kinds of things. Jim in Kent, Washington. Hey, Jim, thanks for listening to KBCS. What's up?
Hey, Tom. Good to talk to you. This is my first time, so I'm a little nervous. Anyway, I'm a little upset in Washington State with a Republican ad that targets the Democratic candidate for not accepting Medicaid patients. So to me, the audacity of any Republican to do that is just astounding. The Republicans, they want to cut Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and as you said on several occasions, that's their plan. They cut, and then when the program fails, they point that out and blame it on someone else. So that's exactly what this congressional candidate is doing. And it just
is this in Washington State?
Yes, it is.
Who are the candidates?
I call him Dino. Dino is his name, but I call him Dino because I don't think we need another dinosaur in D.C. But that's another story. So what I would like to have people do is, sure, they're already doing this with Medicaid, and they're going after Medicare next, and it's really easy to see. All you have to do is go to the CMS website, Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and look at their proposed 2019 budget. They're proposing to cut the amount of funds that a doctor is paid for a Medicare visit from $116 a visit to $46 a visit.
Whoa.
And anyone can see this. I'm surprised this is flying below the radar, especially when you hear all these people say, keep your government hands off my Medicare, you know.
Right.
If anyone goes to the website, you can see their proposal. And so just wake up, people.
Yeah, that's amazing. Jim, if you can tweet a link to that to me at Thom_Hartmann, I would love to see it. I can't independently vouch for what you're saying, but if you can find that link and send it to me via Twitter, I will check it out today, and I'll be ranting about it next week. Jim, thanks a lot for the call. We'll be right back. Welcome back. 51 minutes past the hour. Verity in Addison, Illinois. Hey, Verity, thanks for calling. What's on your mind?
Yes, I wanted to talk about the war on science being waged by the left and my guess as to why they're doing it. Because we all know that the right don't like climate science. It threatens their drug pipeline, their drug being money. And evolution threatens their authoritarian control through religion. But why does the left dismiss and disparage the incontrovertible physical evidence that of the neuroscientific, the neurophysiological and genetic determinants of human personality and behavior? And my guess is this. The left are pro-social protectors of abused minorities who are often abused because of physical factors they cannot change, being black, Semitic, female, gay, etc. But this is not the true cause of the abuse. The abuse is caused by a specific subset of human beings that occur in every human group without exception. Just as cancer is found in every group, so is parasitic intraspecies predation. Humans who habitually and deliberately harm other people for personal and or private gain. Now, the crux of the argument is this. Racism is not caused by race. It is caused by predators using race as a rationalization for their predation. And the ironic thing is, race is not linked to any specific characteristic behavior, but predatory behavior does have specific physiological and possibly genetic determinants. In other words, predators are in effect projecting their own biologically determined behavior onto others whose race or gender does not determine any antisocial behavior. And my conclusion is, don't be afraid of physical truth. If you are indeed a partner and a protector and not a predator, the truth of the biological basis of behavior can only help you.
Okay. Verity, you make a compelling argument, I believe, and probably one that deserves more than 4 minutes on the radio.
Thank you.
Yeah. And so, you know, we'll have to circle back to it at some point in the future, but thank you. Thank you for raising that. Mark in San Diego, California. Hey, Mark, what's up?
Hey, Tom, how you doing?
Good.
You ever find yourself wondering why we constantly get in these situations where unpopular candidate like Kavanaugh is being shoved down our throat against the will of the people? Unpopular
because the Koch brothers want him.
Well, I think it's more structural than that. I think it's because the United States government is the way it's set up is not representative of a majority of the people. Let's start with the U.S. Senate,
sure,
where you have 2 senators from California representing almost 40 million people, and yet North Dakota, with less than 1 million people, gets 2 senators. Iowa, with 4 million people, gets 2 senators. That's why you have people like Chuck Grassley and Mitch McConnell always standing in the way against the will of the people. These guys keep getting reelected, and they achieve seniority. And you got the Congress, which is supposed to be more representative, yet it's gerrymandered so much that it is not. And then you got a guy sitting in the White House who lost by 3 million votes. So there's the United States government for you. That's why we get candidates and policies shoved down our throats constantly that a majority of the country doesn't want.
Yeah, and most of the things that you've described originate in the debate over slavery. They are parts of the compromise, and there were a series of them. The Connecticut Compromise is probably the most famous one, that basically wanted to keep, now in the textbooks, you know, particularly the ones that you read in the northern schools, it was always about Delaware or Rhode Island, the small states. But in fact, the population of Georgia was about the same as one of those states. I forget which one at the time of the writing of the Constitution. The white population of Georgia, but the black population of Georgia was substantial, and so really the 2 senators per state, was based on giving the slave states extra power as well as the small states up north, and that needs to be stripped out of the Constitution, or we need to come to a better understanding of that, number one. And then number two, the Electoral College was, there for the exact same reason, to give the small states and the slave states, a large say. So, yeah, spot on. Mark, thanks for the call. Tony in Huntsville, Alabama. Hey, Tony, what's up?
Hey, Tom, how you doing today?
Good.
Good. Listen, man, I called to talk about Joe Manchin. Is that his name?
Mm-hmm.
I don't agree with the caller before me. Joe Manchin is not a Democrat. If you're a Democrat, you believe in the Democrats. You believe that they're going to elect you, that they're going to stand by you, that they're going to fight for you, get out and knock on doors for you, and then you get up there and you stand with the Republicans on the biggest issue of our time to overturn everything that the Democrats and the progressives have fought for, because you're afraid that they won't stand with you in a Republican state. Well, then you shouldn't have your seat. Yeah. Because either you stand with those people or you don't.
Well, and that was my point, is the electorate knows that. And I think the age, frankly, on both sides, on the Republican side, if you're not a full-blown racist, anti-Semite, white supremacy person, the Republican Party doesn't want you anymore. And on the Democratic side, if you're not actually a progressive and concerned about bringing America back to the values that Franklin Roosevelt and Lyndon Johnson held, then, you can't be a Democrat. And perhaps that's a good thing. Tony, thank you for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
There was a new poll out from Public Affairs Council and Morning Consult. And what this poll found was that while the news media is trusted as a primary source for what's going on, 46% of Americans say they trust the news media, 71% of Americans said that they trust their friends and neighbors as a source of media more than the news media, 71%. Now, what that means is that you, as a Free Speech TV viewer, are well informed on what's going on, far more so than the average person. So you have an opportunity now to be the news source for your friends, your neighbors, your family, whether it's on Facebook or talking to people at the store or your next door neighbors or whatever it may be. And you have an opportunity to let them know about this great news source here, Free Speech TV. Tell them how they can find it. You can go to freespeech.org. You can find all the places where people can watch Free Speech TV. Thank you. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Edmund Morgan's book, The Meaning of Independence, John Adams, George Washington, and Thomas Jefferson. It's a small book. It's anecdotes of the three presidents. I think he's a little harsh on Jefferson and a little too friendly about Adams, you know, small quibbles. But it's a fascinating look into the founders of this country. And so today I'm going to read from the chapter on George Washington. The King of England, George III, was fond of farming. His favorite diversion was to ride about his lands, chatting with the tenants about the crops. Farmer George, he called himself. His arch opponent, George Washington, had the same fondness for farming. He too enjoyed riding about his lands and talking about the crops. Indeed, there was nothing else he enjoyed quite so much. But there the likeness ceased. And among the many other matters that differentiated George Washington from George III, none was more striking than George Washington's greater reserve and dignity. George Washington would never have taken the liberty of calling himself Farmer George, nor would he have allowed anyone else to do so. Even his friends took care to keep their distance, and those who forgot to were apt to be brought up short. A familiar anecdote, though perhaps apocryphal, well illustrates Washington's customary posture toward himself and toward others. During a meeting of the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia in 1787, a group of Washington's friends were remarking on his extraordinarily reserved and remote manner, even among his most intimate acquaintances. Gouverneur Morris, who was always full of boldness and wit, had the nerve to disagree. He could be as familiar with Washington, he said, as with any of his other friends. Alexander Hamilton called his bluff by offering to provide a supper and wine for a dozen of them if Morris would, at the next reception Washington gave, simply walk up to him, gently slap him on the shoulder and say, "My dear General, how happy I am to see you look so well." On the appointed evening, a substantial number of people were already present when Morris arrived, walked up to Washington, bowed, shook hands, and then placed his left hand on Jefferson's shoulder and said, "My dear General, I am so happy to see you look so well." The response was immediate and icy. Washington reached up and removed the hand, stepped back, and fixed his eye in silence on Morris until Morris retreated, abashed, into the crowd. The company looked on in embarrassment, and no one ever tried it again. It seems a most un-American reaction, not the sort of thing that Americans like to see in the men they honor, certainly not the sort of thing one would look for in a leader of a popular revolution today. Yet Americans then and since have honored George Washington far beyond any other man in their history. Moreover, he earned the honor and his dignity and reserve. The aloofness that still separates him from us helped him to earn it. How this came about is part of the larger story of American independence, the story of how the American Revolution transformed some of the least lovable traits of a seemingly ordinary man into national assets. For besides his aloofness, Washington had other characteristics which at this distance appear less than admirable, but which served him and the nation well in the struggle for independence. Perhaps the most conspicuous of these traits, conspicuous at least in his surviving correspondence, was an unabashed concern for his own economic interest. Although Washington was fair in his dealings and did not ask favors of any man, he kept a constant, wary, and often cold eye on making a profit, ever suspicious, and not always without reason, that other men were trying to take advantage of him. Like most Virginia planters, he complained that London merchants were giving him too little for his tobacco or charging him too much for the goods he bought from them. When he rented to tenants, he demanded to be paid punctually and dismissed men's inability to meet their obligations as irresponsibility or knavery. If a man was so foolish as to try cheating him, he was capable of a fury that came through vividly in his letters, as when he wrote to one associate that, "All my concern is that I ever engaged myself in behalf of so ungrateful and dirty a fellow as you are." In operating his plantation at Mount Vernon, he inveighed endlessly against waste of time, waste of supplies, waste of money. "A penny saved is a penny got," he would say, or "many mickles make a muckle," by which he apparently meant that many small savings would add up to a larger one. Even in dealings with his mother, he was watchful, for he thought she had extravagant tastes. He was ready to supply her real wants, he said, but found her imaginary wants indefinite and oftentimes insatiable. Even after he left Mount Vernon in order to win a war and found a nation, his intense absorption with his estate persisted, somehow curiously out of place now and out of proportion to the historic events that he was grappling with. In the darkest hours of the war and later during some of the tensest national crises, he took time to write to the managers of his plantation about making it show a profit. In early December 1776, for example, after fleeing across the Delaware with the remnants of his army, he sent home instructions to make do without buying linen for the slaves, as a price is too heavy to be borne with. And while he was president, his weekly directives to his managers far exceeded in length the documents he prepared for his subordinates in government. No detail was too small for his attention. In December 1792, while his cabinet was rent by the feud between Jefferson and Hamilton, he sent orders that Anthony's, this is one of his slaves presumably, sore toe should be examined, and if it requires it, something should be done to it. Otherwise, as usual, it will serve him as apprentice to be in the house half the winter. 3 months later, when Hamilton was under attack in the House of Representatives for alleged corruption in the Treasury Department, Washington was worried that Caroline, who was never celebrated for her honesty, would steal some of the linen she was entrusted with cutting. The book is The Meaning of Independence, John Adams, George Washington, and Thomas Jefferson.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Greetings, I already did that an hour ago. Hey, welcome back. Professor, in the last hour we were talking about, all these things having to do with the vote this morning and what Jeff Flake is up to, and Lisa Murkowski saying, no, enough already, I'm a no vote, which means it goes to basically Joe Manchin and Jeff Flake. Jeff Flake saying is a yes vote. Susan Collins is going to announce this afternoon what her vote is. But, and we'll get back to this stuff in just a minute. I mean, we just did a whole hour on it. But on the line with us right now is Professor Richard Wolff, our old friend, the economist, the co-founder of Democracy at Work. Democracyatwork.info is the website. And his most recent book, Capitalism's Crisis Deepens, Essays on the Global Economic Meltdown. Professor Wolff, welcome back.
Thank you, Tom. Glad to be here.
I understand you've been traveling around the world. Have you learned anything you want to come back and share with us?
No, I spent Wednesday evening giving a talk at Penn State University, and I hadn't been there before, but I want you to know that the audience was wonderful, and the interest in the kinds of things I have to say, the only word I can say is gratifying. And active students who want to change the way this country is developing was a real pleasure.
That's marvelous. I must be mixing you up with another one of our guests, because I thought you were in Europe for the last week. In any case, the Republican tax scam. We had a conversation with David Stockman about 6-8 months ago, in which he was suggesting that because the Republicans just jacked our national debt by $1.5 trillion, the Fed is, or the Treasury Department is going to have to float $1.5 trillion worth of notes, of IOUs, of treasuries, and that if there's not a lot of demand for them, that they'll have to offer a higher interest rate in order to get people to buy them. And sure enough, the interest rate seems to be going up, and that when that happens, people are going to look at treasuries and say, why should I be in a risky stock market that's, long in the tooth when I can instead get a guaranteed 3% return? I'm just going to move my money out of the market and into the bonds. And when that happens, the stock market collapses, and that would all be a result of the GOP tax scam, and it would probably start in October, which is this week. And because this is the first week of the fiscal year when the federal government has to float all these loans. Does all that make sense, A? And B, do you agree with Stockman, or is he missing something, or what?
What Stockman is doing here, and what he often does, is to present a scenario. Is it possible that things will develop the way he said? The answer is unequivocally yes. Is it certain that this is going to play out in the way he suggests? Then the answer has to be unequivocally no. It depends on so many variables that can go in God knows what direction, that predicting is, as usual, a very dicey proposition. Let's go to the first part of it, though, which I think in a way ties together many things. If the United States, as it has done, cut taxes on corporations drastically from the 35% to the 21%, as it did last December, and saves corporations huge amounts of money that they paid in taxes, and at the same time, because they couldn't have got it through Congress otherwise, they increase, although modestly, government spending, then, as you put it, they're going to have to borrow huge amounts of money. Well, on the one hand, they're going to have trouble doing that because some of the biggest lenders to the United States government, in particular Russia and China, are not going to be doing that in the way they've done in the past. In fact, they're cutting back. And my guess is they will do a good bit more cutting back, which means they may have some trouble being able to float those bonds without offering more and more interest rates, which will have the devastating effects that you described. So I think people should keep that in their mind, that it's not only the tax cut that this crazy administration rammed through when it wasn't an appropriate thing to do, but it's the combination of that with their disastrous foreign policy maneuvers that may be a 1-2 punch that'll knock out the American economy, and we will be talking about that for a long time. But let's suppose one last point. Let's suppose that doesn't happen, that somehow the federal government of the United States will be able to borrow this immense amount of money that it has to because it cut its own taxes, mostly on corporations and the rich. What people need to understand is that the only way the government can pull this off, especially if Russia, China, and so on cut back, is by borrowing from corporations and the rich inside the United States. So here's the irony, and if you understand this, you understand so-called high finance. The government cuts taxes on corporations and the rich, and then turns around and instead of taxing them, borrows the same money from them, having to pay them interest every year for a bunch of years, and then returning the money to them. That's why corporations and the rich like this kind of maneuver, because they save on taxes and basically substitute a profitable interest-bearing loan to the government for the money they used to have to the government in paying taxes. It is a stupendous subsidy to them.
And all the rest of us pay the interest.
Absolutely, and have to come up with the money to pay them back, as those bonds mature that they have in their hands. That's why they go for this kind of thing.
Now, the other point that Stockman made was that if interest rates were just to go up a point and a half, that the interest on a national debt of 22 trillion would exceed what we're spending on the Pentagon right now, which I think is $600 and change billion. And that when that happens, I mean, that'll be a psychological threshold, if nothing else. And by the way, that's more than we spend on all our domestic programs, our discretionary domestic programs combined by an order of magnitude. And that when that happens, there will be such a hue and cry about the unsustainability of the debt in the United States. I mean, Pete Peterson on steroids, although he's passed away, that the people will demand that the Republicans prevail in destroying Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, food stamps, long-term unemployment insurance, all these other so-called social programs. I would say that they maintain a democracy, a society, a functioning society, but that people will demand that these programs be replaced or done away with because people don't want to be saddled with this enormous debt. Now, that's been the Republican talking point since 1960, but they're still doing that dance, and I think what he's doing is previewing Paul Ryan's strategy after the elections. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think that's correct. I think that's the logical thing for them to have to do. Now that the pretense that they care about a deficit is exploded by their own decision, I think that's what we can expect. I think one more dimension that perhaps Stockman didn't talk about is that because of the crash of capitalism back in 2008 and the decision of the Federal Reserve to drop interest rates virtually to zero in the 10 years since, every corporation that wanted some free money to borrow to try something it thought might work has borrowed that money. Every third world government that needed the money to survive has borrowed at these low interest rates. And they now have to pay the rising interest rates as the Federal Reserve jacks up the interest rates. That puts countries like Argentina, Turkey, Indonesia, and a whole bunch of others in an impossible situation. They cannot carry and service the debt that they have accumulated. And the result is those countries are plunging into the kind of mess you could see already in Turkey and in other countries, and that too will play its role in disrupting global arrangements and so forth. To pretend that this is all under control of Mr. Trump and his environment is so silly that it's kind of hard to take seriously, but they're trying manfully to act as though they're in charge of all of this and that the economy is healthy. We have a debt-ridden economy that is less sustainable and more fragile than I've ever seen in my life.
Wow. Wow. A grim reminder of the reality that has been brought to us by Reaganomics and the two Santa Claus theory, et cetera. Professor Richard Wolff, thanks so much for dropping by.
My pleasure. Thank you, Tom, and have a good weekend.
Thanks. Yeah, you too. Have a great weekend. It's always good talking with you, sir. Richard Wolff, democracyatwork.info. You can tweet him at Prof Wolff, PROFWOLFF. We'll be back with your calls on Anything Goes Friday in just a moment.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back in just a second. It's coming up on 16 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Fair and only slightly unbalanced. And welcome back. James in St. Petersburg, Florida. Hey, James, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how you doing today?
Good. What's up?
Good. Good. I got a question about our Supreme Court. One of the members of the Supreme Court is always called the Chief Justice, and I don't know what his responsibilities and duties are with respect to the court or let alone the American people. And I'm curious if our Senate were to be asinine enough to send a jackass to the Supreme Court, would they have, or would he have, as the Chief Justice, the ability to say, I'm sorry, this is a bridge too far. We cannot accept this person.
Yeah. I think we have sent jackasses to the Supreme Court. Scalia and Thomas and Alito and Roberts are at the top of that list in my mind. But and Roger Taney. But
well, that's our prejudice, and I agree with you. But nevertheless.
Yeah, but in terms of what a Chief Justice can do, he has the same one vote that everybody else has. The privileges that he has are largely administrative. I believe, things like first choice of clerks, or actually, James, I don't know. I guess that's the best answer. I should look this up, and in fact, you got me curious now, so I will do it after we get off the air, and we can talk about it next week. I don't know what significantly differentiates the Chief Justice from the rest of the justices. So, well, I'll do my best to find out.
That was my question, and I'm not sure either. But it seems to me like there should be at some point where somebody with some sense on that level of hierarchy should be able to say, I'm sorry, but we cannot accept
enough already. Yeah, you said that earlier. Yep, James, amen. Yeah, thank you for the call. Mark in Las Vegas. Hey, Mark, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Hold on. Let me take it off of speakerphone. There you go. Sorry about that. Are you still there?
I am. What's up?
Okay, very good, very good. The irony of all of these social programs is that the wealthy and the Republicans tend to think that these programs are just going to the poor, and somehow that all that money just disappears. But that money. Sorry, that was the other line. But this money isn't. I mean, of course, the poor and everybody benefit by this, but who really benefits are businesses and the medical care system. That's where that money flows to.
Sure.
And that is fundamentally what's going to happen, is that they're going to shoot themselves in the foot by harming these programs. Not only are they harming millions of Americans, but they're going to harm their own business interest.
Yeah. I would argue that medicine broadly, now there are obvious exceptions to this, but medicine broadly is one of those areas that should be considered part of the commons and should be done on a nonprofit basis, that the profit motive is corruptive or corrupting of you know, the whole system of providing health care to people.
I absolutely agree with all of that, but it's a tremendous irony. Who is going to be harmed by all of this stupidity?
Yeah, absolutely. And we are the only country, the only developed country in the world that has a profit-based healthcare system, and that's you know, the largest part of our profits. Why we pay twice what the rest of the world pays for everything from most surgeries to most drugs. Mark, thank you for the call. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Brad in Elk Grove Village, Illinois. Hey, Brad, what's on your mind today?
One of your earlier callers said about Joe Manchin being a, what did you call him? A conservative.
Yeah.
There's already a conservative running in Arizona. Her name is Kirsten Sinema, and her positions are very centrist for a Democrat. Now, she is a bisexual and admitted bisexual, so I'm not sure that that will hurt or harm her in the in that primary or in the actual Senate election, because that's,
you know, each district is going to elect the people that they're going to elect, Brad, and my point, and I can't speak to the Arizona electorate, but I can speak to the West Virginia electorate. In fact, of all the states in the United States, West Virginia and Michigan were the two where Bernie just absolutely kicked it out of the park. And that's something that the Democratic Party should be paying attention to when they're talking about, you know, who they're going to put in there. Bill in Seattle. Hey, Bill, thanks for listening to 91.3 FM. What's up? Our Pacifica affiliate.
Hi, Tom. Hey, thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
I just thought that there was a great piece in the New York Times today, pointed out that the first time in the history of the Republic, there's a Supreme Court justice who's been appointed by a president that didn't win a majority and approved by a Senate that the majority of the senators had less votes than the minority of the senators that voted against him. So, and that was Neil Gorsuch. Obviously Trump, he only got 46% of the vote. And then this is pretty amazing. 73 million voters voted for the senators that voted no, and only 58 million, 58 million senators voted for the senators that voted to approve Gorsuch. So Gorsuch, on that basis, Gorsuch only got 42% of the vote.
Right, or via indirect representation. Yeah, this is the problem with states, regardless of their population, having two senators, and it's obviously the problem with the Electoral College. Both things that are left over from the debate over slavery, and you would think finally by 2018, 240 years after the Constitution was ratified, that we could get this thing cleaned up. We could get all the slavery out of that document. We still have not. Bill, excellent points all. I appreciate it. Rob in Phoenix. Hey, Rob, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for having me on. Hey, I just wanted to try to call in when Congressman Pocan was on, but I'm just going to pass this on now. I think the things that Democrats could do to help get more support is basically, try and pass a law at the federal level that says that all provisional ballots at the state level must be followed up in some way, either by mail to, tell people whether their vote counted or not.
Yeah, you would think if somebody goes to the effort of showing up at a polling place, that's a substantial effort. Only about a third of us do that in midterm elections, congressional elections. If somebody's going to go to that effort and the state has no record of why they're there, I would say it's incumbent upon the state, not upon the voter, to find out why that record doesn't exist.
And exactly. The way I say that is because we need to keep this alive after the election. So if something happens that's terrible, people need to know, oh, my vote didn't count or it did count.
Yeah.
And they need to be informed on that, because otherwise they just think, oh, I voted, and it goes away.
Yeah, completely agree. Rob, well said. And this is something that we need to be paying attention to. Thanks, Rob, for the call. Susan in Montpelier, Vermont. Hey, Susan, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Thank you so much for hearing me.
Sure. What's up?
I understand you used to live here.
Yeah, Louise and I lived in Montpelier for, about a decade, I think.
Well, I am calling. I am 70 years old. 50 years ago, I was sexually molested, and it resulted in a pregnancy. And I want to tell you, I never felt so stuck in my entire life. But I just tried to make the best of it. And making the best of it was staying in a relationship for 10 years with an abuser.
Wow.
And now that I'm older and much more wiser, at 70 years old, I know that staying in that relationship was not healthy for either me or my son.
Right.
And so the suffering goes on intergenerational from that experience. And so one of my greatest concerns about this Supreme Court procedural vote today is that we are sending a message that says it's okay for boys to act the way Kavanaugh acted between ages, 17 to 20. It's not normal.
Right, and Fox News...
It's not normal for boys to act that way.
I agree. And Fox News is not only amplifying that message, but they're also saying that if those boys are wealthy and white, then they are going to come under attack because they're white. And, they're adding white grievance to this whole thing and making Kavanaugh the victim of presumably some black or brown people. And the only people I can think of in this case would be, Cory Booker and Kamala Harris, who are, on the Senate Judiciary Committee and are both African Americans. It's bizarre. But yeah, so your point is that women who've had these experiences can see through Kavanaugh. Is that the bottom line here, Susan?
Absolutely. I can see through him, and I think he is very clever because he brought up the calendar. He brought up the yearbook because he knew the truth was going to be discovered.
Yeah.
And we learn in basic research courses that what you see is what you see. And he's trying to, to turn all of that around so that, it's not what you really see. You don't take it at face value. It really means something else.
Yeah, no, I get it. Susan, we're hitting a break here. Thank you for the call. It's 28 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's Anything Goes Friday. Back with more of your calls. We're going to check in with Talk Media News. All kinds of stuff coming up. Stick around. Today we're reading from Martha Nussbaum's new book, The Monarchy of Fear, a philosopher looks at our political crisis. This is from the introduction. There's a lot of fear around in the U.S. today, and this fear is often mingled with anger, blame, and envy. Fear all too often blocks rational deliberation, poisons hope, and impedes constructive cooperation for a better future. What is today's fear about? Well, many Americans feel themselves powerless, out of control of their own lives. They fear that the American dream, the hope that our children will flourish and do even better than you have done, has died, and that everything has slipped away from them. These feelings have their basis in real problems, among others, income stagnation in the lower middle class, alarming declines in the health and longevity of members of this group, especially men, and the escalating costs of higher education at the very time that a college degree is increasingly required for employment. But real problems are difficult to solve, and their solutions take long, hard study and cooperative work toward an uncertain future. It can consequently seem all too attractive to convert that sense of panic and impotence into blame and the othering of outsider groups such as immigrants, racial minorities, and women. They have taken our jobs, or wealthy elites have stolen our country. The problems that globalization and automation create for working class Americans are real, deep, and seemingly intractable. Rather than face those difficulties and uncertainties, people who sense their standard of living declining can instead grasp after villains, and a fantasy takes shape. If we can somehow keep them out, build a wall, or keep them in their place in subservient positions, we can regain our pride and, for men, their masculinity. Fear leads then to aggressive othering strategies rather than to useful analysis. At the same time, fear also runs rampant among men on the people on the left who seek greater social and economic equality and the vigorous protection of hard-won rights for women and minorities. Many people who are dismayed by the election are reacting to it as if the end of the world is at hand. A majority of my students, many acquaintances, many colleagues feel and say often with anguish that our democracy is on the verge of collapse, that the new administration is unprecedented in its willingness to cater to racism, misogyny, and homophobia. They fear especially for the possible collapse of democratic freedoms, speech, travel, association, the press. My younger students especially think that the America they know and love is about to disappear. Rather than analyze matters soberly and listen to other people trying to sort things through, they often demonize an entire half of the American electorate, portraying them as monsters, excuse me, enemies of everything good. As in the book of Revelation, these are the last days when a righteous remnant must contend against satanic forces. We all need first to take a deep breath and recall our history. When I was a little girl, African Americans were being lynched in the South. Communists were losing their jobs. Women were just barely beginning to enter prestigious universities in the workforce, and sexual harassment was a ubiquitous offense that had no laws to deter it. Jews could not win partnerships in major law firms. Gays and lesbians, criminals under law, were almost always in the closet. People with disabilities had no rights in public space and public education. Transgender was a category that had as yet no name. America was far from beautiful. These facts tell us two things my students need to know. First, the America for which they are nostalgic never existed, not fully. It was a work in progress, a set of dynamic aspirations put in motion by tough work, cooperation, hope, and solidarity over a long period of time. A just and inclusive America never was, and is not yet a fully achieved reality. Second, this present moment may look like backsliding from our march toward human equality, but it's not the apocalypse, and it's actually a time when hope and work can accomplish a great deal of good. On both left and right, panic doesn't just exaggerate our dangers, it also makes our moment much more dangerous than it would otherwise be, more likely to lead to genuine disasters. It's like a bad marriage in which fear, suspicion, and blame displace careful thought about what the real problems are and how to resolve them. Instead, those emotions taking over become their own problem and prevent constructive work, hope, listening, and cooperation. When people are afraid of one another and of an unknown future, fear easily gives rise to scapegoating, to fantasies of payback, and to a poisonous envy of the fortunate, whether those victorious in the election or those dominant socially and economically. We all remember FDR's statement that we have nothing to fear but fear itself. We recently heard departing President Obama say, democracy can buckle when we give in to fear.
1 minute.
Roosevelt was wrong if we take his words literally. Although we had reason to fear fear, we certainly had many other things to fear in his time, such as Nazism, hunger, and social conflict. Fear of those evils was rational, and to that extent, we should not fear our fear, though we should always examine it. But Obama's more precise and modest statement is surely right. Giving way to fear, which means drifting with its currents, refusing skeptical examination, is surely dangerous. We need to think hard about fear and where fear is leading us. After taking a deep breath, we all need to understand ourselves as well as we can, using that moment of detachment to figure out where fear and related emotions come from and where they are leading us. But you might not be concerned so far that fear is really a deep problem for democratic self-government. And then she goes into a dialogue about that. The Monarchy of Fear by Martha Nussbaum.
I'm Nina Turner, and you're watching Free Speech TV.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. It's Anything Goes Friday. Ginger in Eureka, California. Hey, Ginger. Thanks for listening to us. What's up? Ginger? I have no Ginger. Okay, Ginger's on line 3, Louise. You can check it out. Craig in Santa Barbara. Hey, Craig, what's on your mind today?
Hello there. Yes, I haven't heard you speak, Tom, about a study done by 2 political science professors, Gillens and Page.
Oh, I speak about it frequently from Northwestern University that found that if you're not in the top, 5% of Americans or 10% of Americans, the probability of legislation being passed that reflects your desires, your explicit desires, is equivalent to random noise. Yes.
Oh, excellent. I'm so glad to hear that you are aware of this study. And it is exactly...
I probably cite it once a week.
Okay. Well, I listen maybe once a week, so I probably...
Okay, there you go.
Okay. But I'm so glad to hear you say this. There's so much insistence about the benefit of voting, but the outcomes of the average citizens are really only coincidental as a causal issue. There is negligible to zero relationship between what the average citizens want and any legislative outcomes.
Right.
So,
and this is a testimonial. Yeah, this is the testimonial to the power that money has over our electoral system since the 1976 Buckley decision, where Lewis Powell on the Supreme Court said that giving money to a political candidate is protected by the First Amendment's free speech provision, something that prior to 1976, no government, no president, nobody had ever said. And in fact, we tightly regulated money in politics, have been since the Tillman Act in 1907. And now we've got billionaires basically owning the entire Republican Party and a chunk of the Democratic Party as well. And that's something that we all need to attend to. Craig, well said. Thank you very much for the call. Maine in Chicago. Hey, Maine, what's on your mind?
Yeah, how you doing, Tom? Yeah, I just wanted to say what I see developing is something like the Fourth Reich, but the American capitalist style, the privatizing of the commons and wanting to privatize, other things like the schools and stuff, which should be free.
Yep. And
free health care. This is the things that we have to fight for. As wanting to be on democracy side, and not just call it Democrats, but democracy. And it's not socialism, but it's democratizing capitalism. Whereas they want to privatize our democracy. They want us to pay for our democracy through privatization and stuff like that. We have to demand our democracy with free education and free health care.
I absolutely agree, man. And meanwhile, you've got now Betsy DeVos's brother, Eric Prince, who apparently has made a successful sales pitch to Donald Trump that we should completely withdraw from Afghanistan and turn that country over to the new version of Blackwater and let him run a private war against the Taliban instead of us. And I mean, this is Blade Runner kind of stuff. This is the direction that they're going. But spot on, Maine. Yeah, amen. David in Elkins, West Virginia. Hey, David, what's up?
Well, I'm on. Hi, Tom. How are you?
I'm well. Yes, you're on. What's on your mind?
I just wanted to kind of debunk the myth about why West Virginia voted for Bernie in the primary.
Okay.
I think it wasn't so much that we're progressive at all. I think it was totally an anti-Hillary vote.
Okay. So you're saying that West Virginia is anti-female reactionary, or do they have some special reason to dislike Hillary?
I think they believe all the stuff about crooked Hillary and Benghazi. And...
No, but my point, David, is why West Virginia and not Virginia? What's so different about West Virginia?
Oh, you've got me there, Tom. I don't know that I could answer that.
Yeah. I don't either.
I've worked in the bar business a long time in this town for the last 20 years, and I talked to lots of people, and I just really picked up anti-Hillary sentiment.
I see. So do you think that these are people who would not have voted for a Democrat in the general election, even if it was Bernie?
Yes, I don't think they would have.
That's interesting. Who knows? I tell this story many times. I knew a bunch of people in D.C. when I lived there who voted for Bernie in the primary and then voted for Trump in the general. Most of them were ex-military. And I know these people, and I know that they would have voted for Bernie in the general had they had an
Well,
opportunity.
I've met plenty of those people that would have voted for Bernie, but I just think overwhelmingly it would have been an anti-Hillary vote.
Yeah. Okay. Well, David, you add to my list of things to think about and ponder. David, thank you for that. Appreciate the call. Tom in Bay City, Texas. Hey, Tom, what's up?
Yeah, just real quick, I think we ought to pause a moment. And with the Kavanaugh confirmation almost a given deal, I think we ought to congratulate the Republicans on totally republicizing the government of the United States from presidency to the congressional and also now the Supreme Court.
Yeah, they've corporatized the whole thing.
They made it partisan, yeah.
Yeah, and what's so ironic is it's the Supreme Court that made it possible for CEOs to make 1,000 times what their workers are making and to use that money to buy politicians. And then those same billionaires who were empowered by the Supreme Court then use their money to put into place on the Supreme Court more people, actually politicians. I mean, Brett Kavanaugh has never worked as a lawyer. He's never tried a case. He's never defended a case. He's never prosecuted a case. He's never been in a courtroom as a lawyer, only as a judge. He was a right-wing hitman with a law degree for George W. Bush. He worked on the Bush v. Gore campaign. He was a right-wing hitman with a law degree working for Ken Starr in the late 90s during the Clinton administration. And you know, he went from being a right-wing hitman against Clinton, and then on behalf of Bush, and then, a counselor who was advising Trump, presumably, that torture is just fine, thank you very much. He went from that to being a judge on the second highest court in the land with no judicial experience, no law experience, and now they want to put him on the Supreme Court. And that, to me, is the most mind-boggling part of this. You know, here's a guy who's got, no qualifications for this. I mean, the most qualified guy ever. Yeah, he went to Yale as a legacy student because his grandfather went there. Give me a break. Right. Tom, absolutely. Thank you very much for calling. Glenn in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, says you want to disagree with me. What's up, Glenn?
Hey, Tom. Hey, yeah, I wanted to ask you why you never give Trump credit for the good stuff he's done for the country.
Like what?
And I'll give you an example. If you you ever heard of Veterans Choice?
You're talking about the program where veterans can go to local doctors if the VA is too far away from them?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that was put into place by Obama.
Trump passed a bill in June 6th this year, $55 billion bill. Well, as a veteran, and I have a cousin that's a Vietnam veteran, the system has improved tenfold to what it was a year ago.
Yeah, well, absolutely, Glenn. You know why? Because Bernie Sanders got increased funding through over the opposition of the Republicans. This stuff, seriously, Glenn, look it up. This stuff goes back to the Obama administration, and Bernie Sanders played a huge role in that. When the Democrats controlled the Senate, he was the chairman of the Veterans Committee. He was on this show every week talking about this stuff and really, really working hard on it over Republican opposition. Republicans think that the Veterans Administration, now, Trump likes to use veterans as props, but they believe that the Veterans Administration is socialism, and it is, and therefore they want to do away with it. Rich in Cedro Woolley, Washington. Hey, Rich, what's up?
Morning, Tom. Now, if we take the Blasey Ford and the sexual assault, the lies and the demeanor, set that on the side. Let's call that the spotted owl that's trying to save the old growth forest. I think the real thing that's going on here is we've got an unholy alliance forming between the executive and the judicial branches, which in turn will diminish the power of the Senate, as well as our representation secondarily through the Senate. But why are senators voting to diminish their power? This should be the question.
How so? You're talking about putting Kavanaugh on the court because he's a fan of executive power? Is that your point?
Well, exactly. If the Congress passes something that diminishes presidential power, or the president does something that the Congress doesn't like, they say he's overstepping his bounds. The president throws it over to the court, and the court, who will become increasingly in his back pocket, will rule in the president's favor, and thereby diminish the power of the legislative branch.
Where it'll get real interesting is when you have a Democrat in the White House.
Yeah, well, then he'll flip his position.
I suspect they will, and I think they'll do it, without a moment's hesitation. But we will see.
But in general, they're voting to diminish their own power. So and this sets a dangerous precedent. I think everything. I don't want to say everything else is a sideshow, but like I said, it's like the spotted owl saving the old growth forest. So it's the reason. It's the leverage to prevent him from getting in there. But I think the real sin here will be the unholy matrimony between executive and judicial.
Yeah, it could be. My sense of it is that Brett Kavanaugh started publicly pushing out this meme that he was willing to support President Trump, Donald Trump, if he was, if Robert Mueller wanted to interview him or subpoena him or a grand jury wanted to talk to him or any of that kind of stuff, even though he was front and center in the persecution and the prosecution of Bill Clinton, he doesn't think that that should happen to Donald Trump. I suspect that's going to be sidelined, but who knows? You may well be right, Rich. And, I think that your analysis is right, whether it's a structural analysis or not, or merely a tactic that Kavanaugh is using to get the support of Trump to get on the court. I don't know. I think it's the latter, though.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back, we're going to check in with Talk Media News here in a moment, and then we'll be back with your calls for Anything Goes Friday right after that. And welcome back. Joe in Cupertino, California. Hey, Joe, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Hi, Tom. Great shows today. I called Louisa to keep it short, but, we had Diane out here, and she's running again this year.
Diane Feinstein?
She served, yes, I think she served her purpose. I really want to support her. She's probably going to win. But we need to start finding her replacement, whether it's for Diane, who's aged, or Kamala Harris may be getting moved up. I think we need to start looking to someone coming up. Ballots are being mailed out here in California on Monday. I love Roe, and I love Congressman Pocan. I think they're the face of the future. I don't know if you've seen anybody in California that you like, but Californians need to rally behind somebody. As a Bernie-crat, I will support whatever Democratic candidate comes forward. Currently, they're looking at the Senate Speaker, Pro Tem DeLeon, as Diane's replacement. I don't support that, but who will replace Dianne Feinstein in the 2020 election is the question I have, and I just wanted to see if you had any opinion there.
She's up for re-election in 2020?
No, she's up for re-election this year.
That's what I thought.
She's 90. She's going to be 90 years old, and I think she's going to be re-elected. But I think it's time for
Feinstein is 89? No.
I think she's almost.
I think you're a decade ahead of yourself. I think she's almost 80.
She just had surgery to have a pacemaker implanted, and I thought that was going to give her a reason to retire.
Well, yeah. I mean, my brother-in-law had that when he was 65. That doesn't mean, that just means she's got a congenital heart condition.
No. I understand that. Now, as I suggest, you were talking about term limits, and I think that the federal retirement age is something like 72. Now, if you apply those kind of logical terms, and we don't have to deal with 1951, Grassley was elected to the Congress. Now, how does he know about birth control? It wasn't legal. You've sought this before. So, I mean, at some point, you've got to give the younger guy a chance. And I think that we have a new class of people coming up.
So who do you want to see replace Feinstein when the day comes? I mean, who do you think? I mean, obviously Gavin Newsom gets national publicity, but he's running for governor, isn't he?
Adam Schiff is a very smart man. I think Adam Schiff knows his business. I think Adam Schiff is the person that's got the spine that maybe might be lacking in some of the other Democrats.
And he certainly knows how to use the media.
Well, he does too, but he's been reelected for 10 years.
Yeah, but he kind of lives on MSNBC. I mean, he's which I'm saying that as a good thing. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. That he knows how to use the media and get the message out there.
I thought that Garamendi is another name that comes, but he's also an elderly gentleman, and I think once you're 70 years old, it's kind of hard to relate to the young people that are voting.
Yeah.
So
well, and the Republicans. I mean, Amy Coney Bryant is, I think, 46. She's half a decade younger than Brett Kavanaugh. She's the next one that they'll pop up to the Supreme Court. And
another name I'm just throwing out there, but it's probably not for Senate, is the mayor of Los Angeles, Garamendi. This is another up-and-coming rising star in the Democratic Party. I don't know if he wants to be a senator or not, but this is the youth that we're going to bring up.
I think probably anybody who has fought to gain elective office, particularly one as high as the mayor of Los Angeles, would be just fine with becoming a United States senator. Joe, thanks for the call. This is a good conversation for Californians to be having. Absolutely. We're going to check in with Luke Vargas with Talk Media News in just a minute. Stick around. There was a new poll out from Public Affairs Council and Morning Consult. And what this poll found was that while the news media is trusted as a primary source for what's going on, 46% of Americans say they trust the news media, 71% of Americans said that they trust their friends and neighbors as a source of media more than the news media, 71%. Now, what that means is that you, as a Free Speech TV viewer, are well informed on what's going on, far more so than the average person. So you have an opportunity now to be the news source for your friends, your neighbors, your family, whether it's on Facebook or talking to people at the store or your next door neighbors or whatever it may be. And you have an opportunity to let them know about this great news source here. Free Speech TV. Tell them how they can find it. You can go to freespeech.org. You can find all the places where people can watch Free Speech TV. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on
Vargas
Facebook.
is on the line with us. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Loving What You Do, Alan Ratner's new book. Luke, what's up in the news today?
Hey, Tom. Well, of course, starting with the Nobel Peace Prize being awarded today, a little bit of good news in a world of rather dim headlines, I must say. The two recipients, if you haven't talked about them on the show before, I think are just worth giving a brief bio about them. One is Denis Mukwege, who's a Congolese physician who in the late 90s, after that country's civil war, created a hospital treating victims of sexual violence. He's treated thousands of people, was actually in surgery this morning for a second patient when he was given this prize. The other recipient, a woman from northern Iraq, a member of the Yazidi Kurdish religious minority group who was raped and enslaved by the Islamic State back in 2014, held as a slave in Mosul, escaped, told her story to journalists, became sort of an outspoken about telling her story of sexual violence. The Nobel Committee, the Norwegian Nobel Committee chair today was asked in an interview, and this really sparked my attention, sort of, how does this relate to the ongoing Me Too movement? And she started by saying, yes, I mean, they're related insofar as both are, urging women to speak out more and that telling their stories is very important. But she drew a distinction saying, look, sexual violence is not the same as sort of societal norms, which Me Too aims to address, that sexual violence needs to be talked about on the same page as the use of chemical weapons in war. It is a war crime. It is a type of psychological and emotional warfare. And in the case of the Yazidis, things like sexual violence, rape, were used almost as a way of cultural genocide, right? Basically watering down a distinct genetic pool so that the Yazidi lineage could not be passed on. But in the process of answering this question, I caught that the head of the Nobel Committee said, look, this is, this sexual violence doesn't just affect women, it affects men. And the one example she cited, which is a cause for much embarrassment and shame for Americans and will be for a long time, was, hey, look, men can be victims. Look at what happened at Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq. I mean, it really is a bad week for the U.S. when we are spurning international justice in the same breath as, these campaigners for sexual violence are being praised by the Nobel Committee. American actions in the war in Iraq are being condemned. It was stunning to see all of that come, especially on the day of the Kavanaugh vote.
Yeah, I'm recalling a story of men in the prison in Iraq being raped with batons. Is that what she was talking about, or was there something else?
And forced to perform sexual acts on each other, and it's really just a disgraceful thing. So obviously, pretty notable that
this is the wonderful stuff that Brett Kavanaugh was advising George Bush he could do. Apparently.
Exactly right. So,
yeah, apparently.
There you have that, a proud moment to be an American. Can I zoom over to a domestic story?
Zoom away, Luke.
We're learning a little bit more about Amazon's pay raise not being quite what we thought it was going to be.
I got an email from an Amazon worker. I talked about this yesterday, and an Amazon worker sent me a note saying, yeah, everybody in the bottom got a pay raise. I just got a pay cut. And I was like, really?
Yeah, I'm curious how much detail she went into, because we're learning a little bit more as this progresses. What we're now hearing is that warehouse workers are no longer going to get bonuses each month for their attendance or for extra productivity, which amounted to hundreds of dollars a month on average, the Associated Press reporting. People may be losing about $3,000 a year because of these lost benefits. And one that really caught my attention, Amazon is discontinuing its stock reward program for longtime employees. And that's really important because the Amazon, share price is now about almost $1,900 a share. And when you started employment in these warehouse jobs, apparently, and this will be good to have your listener follow up, an employee would get 1 to 2 shares. That's not a insignificant amount of money. And then 1 extra share per year. Someone in the AP article saying, how is an employee even making $15 an hour ever going to save up to buy $1,900, $2,000 a share stock? So again, maybe not a huge impact on new hires, but they do seem to be sort of fitting this economic mold of, not rewarding longevity and loyalty to companies.
Well, and one has to wonder if when they start having a decline in longevity and loyalty and a decline in productivity, because they're no longer rewarding it, to what extent will they say a year from now, well, gee, look at this, our productivity is down, our turnover is up, we never should have given that pay raise, we're going to go back to minimum wage.
That would be extraordinarily cynical. I hope we don't see that. And I will, to Amazon's credit, say they were not at minimum wage to begin with. They were so anyway. I will say, I find it telling the way Amazon's sort of corporate spokespeople have been spinning this today, saying, look, this is a great thing. We're giving our employees more, making compensation, quote, more immediate and predictable, which to me reads as, hey, we're going to give everyone, 1 M&M now as opposed to 2 tomorrow. It's like they're buying into people's instincts to take a little more money up front, but then taking away the benefits that the old American economy used to give workers who really legged it out for a company. Now it's just, hey, get a higher wage and you should be grateful for it. It's, obviously there was a little bit of a more complicated truth behind this very flowery story that we were all celebrating earlier this week.
Yeah, remarkable. It's like the marshmallow test. Luke Vargas with Talk Media News, so you can follow him at The Courier on Twitter. Thank you, Luke.
Thank you, Tom. Talk to you soon.
Yep, great talking with you. We'll be back. It's Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program. More of your calls, my thoughts, and the news of the day right after this. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
There's a new poll out from Public Affairs Council and Morning Consult. And what this poll found was that while the news media is trusted as a primary source for what's going on, 46% of Americans say they trust the news media, 71% of Americans said that they trust their friends and neighbors as a source of media more than the news media, 71%. Now, what that means is that you, as a free speech TV viewer, are well informed on what's going on, far more so than the average person. So you have an opportunity now to be the news source for your friends, your neighbors, your family, whether it's on Facebook or talking to people at the store or your next door neighbors or whatever it may be. And you have an opportunity to let them know about this great news source here, Free Speech TV. Tell them how they can find it. You can go to freespeech.org. You can find all the places where people can watch Free Speech TV. Thank you. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Legacy of Secrecy, The Long Shadow of the JFK Assassination by Lamar Waldron and me. The assassination of President John F. Kennedy on November 22, 1963 triggered cover-ups by officials, this is from the introduction, by the way, that continue to negatively impact American politics, life, and foreign policy. Legacy of Secrecy details those cover-ups and hidden investigations, many for the first time, including the reasons they were carried out under such intense secrecy. Most were spawned by John and Robert Kennedy's top-secret 1963 plan to stage a coup against Fidel Castro, a plan so highly classified that it only started to be exposed in 2005 and is finally revealed in this book. Their own confessions now show the three mafia bosses, Carlos Marcello, Santo Trafficante, and Johnny Roselli, were behind JFK's assassination. They used parts of the secret coup plan to kill JFK in a way that forced Attorney General Robert Kennedy, President Lyndon B. Johnson, excuse me, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, and high CIA official Richard Helms to withhold critical information not only from the public and the press, but also from each other and sometimes their own investigators. It's important to keep in mind that JFK was murdered just a year after the tense nuclear standoff during the Cuban Missile Crisis. The main goals of U.S. officials were to prevent a nuclear confrontation with the Soviets and to protect JFK's ally high up in the Cuban government, Commander Juan Almeida, head of the Cuban Army in 1963, still listed as Cuba's #3 official today. While U.S. leaders have managed to prevent a confrontation with Russia and preserve a critical ally in the Cuban government, this limited the investigation into JFK's murder, allowing the three mafia chiefs and their associates to remain free. As a result, the long shadow of secrecy surrounding both JFK's murder and the coup plan set the stage for the murder of Martin Luther King, ultimately driving 2 presidents from office and bringing about the murders of 5 congressional witnesses in the mid-1970s. Legacy of Secrecy breaks excuse me, important new ground in key areas, detailing for the first time Louisiana godfather Carlos Marcello's clear confession to ordering JFK's assassination. Marcello's criminal empire ranged from Dallas to Memphis, and previously secret files at the National Archives have shown that he made this confession in 1985 to an FBI informant ruled credible by a federal judge as part of a secret FBI undercover sting operation named Camtex. Exposed here for the first time, Camtex yielded Marcello's admission that he'd met Lee Harvey Oswald and set Jack Ruby up in business in Dallas. The operation also generated hundreds of hours of heretofore secret prison audio tapes of Marcello discussing his crimes, recorded using the FBI informant's bugged transistor radio. Yet the FBI and Justice Department withheld most of that information from the public and Congress for years until its revelation in this book. Carlos Marcello wasn't the only mob boss who confessed his involvement in JFK's murder to a trusted associate. Legacy also uncovers important new information about Marcello's partners in JFK's assassination, Tampa godfather Santos Trafficante and Johnny Roselli, the Chicago Mafia's man in Las Vegas and Hollywood. Shortly before their deaths, both mobsters admitted their roles in JFK's murder to their attorneys. 2 of their associates with documented ties to the secret JFK Almeida coup plan likewise confessed. Using exclusive new information supported by FBI files apparently withheld from Congress, this book names 2 of the Georgia men who paid James Earl Ray to kill the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, white supremacist Joseph Miltier and Hugh R. Spake. Miltier, who had been involved in Marcello's murder of JFK, was part of a small clique of racists in Atlanta who used Marcello to broker the contract to murder Dr. King. We document James Earl Ray's ties to Marcello's heroin smuggling operation and long overlooked evidence in FBI files linking Ray to Marcello's associate, Johnny Roselli. Finally, this book explains why Ray, while fleeing to Canada the day after killing Dr. King in Memphis, made a 400-plus mile detour south to Atlanta, where he contacted Spake to get help from Miltier. In 1979, the last congressional committee to investigate the murders of JFK and Dr. King, the House Select Committee on Assassinations, concluded, quote, that Trafficante, like Marcello, had the motive, means, and opportunity to assassinate President Kennedy, end of quote from the congressional report. The HSCA had been created in the wake of Roselli's sensational murder, but the HSCA was unable to establish direct evidence of Marcello's complicity. And the same was true for Trafficante and Roselli, because the CIA, FBI, and other federal agencies withheld so many relevant files. The HSCA, headed by civil rights figure Louis Stokes, also concluded there was a likelihood of conspiracy in the assassination of Dr. King, and that financial gain was James Earl Ray's primary motivation. But they were unable to determine who had paid Ray or how the conspiracy had worked, because the FBI and other agencies had hid critical files. With the help of more than 24 associates of John and Robert Kennedy, backed up by thousands of recently released documents at the National Archives, many of which are quoted here for the first time, Legacy tells the full story denied to Congress and the American people, legacy of secrecy.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Full exercise.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
You know, welcome back. The Republican Party keeps saying that, Chuck Grassley said it again this morning, as did Mitch McConnell. Mitch McTurtle out there going, well, this man, Brett Kavanaugh, he is well qualified, according to the American Bar Association. Well qualified. Well, it turns out, yeah, that when in 2003, when Brett Kavanaugh was first nominated to the federal court by George W. Bush as a thank you for his 2 years of service in the Bush White House, advising George that he could torture people at Abu Ghraib, the ABA did say he was well qualified. But then after his hearing, in 2006, actually after 2 hearings, in 2006, the American Bar Association said, no, sir, no. We're not going to call him well qualified anymore. We're going to downgrade that to qualified. And then this week, the American Bar Association, in a letter to the Senate, said that they are reopening their evaluation of Kavanaugh because new information of a material nature regarding his temperament during the September 27 hearing has come to our attention. In other words, he's, shouting and yelling at senators and asserting Democratic conspiracy theories, and now you got Trump saying George Soros is behind. I mean, it's bizarre. And the ABA is going to take him from qualified to probably not qualified. But they already downgraded him back in 2006. This guy is not at the top of the pool of qualified candidates for the U.S. Supreme Court. Not even close. So, anyhow, let's pick up some of your phone calls here. It's Anything Goes Friday. Tony in Lancaster, Texas. What's up, Tony?
Hey, thank you, Tom, for taking my call. I just wanted to elaborate on the Amazon wage so-called. It's really not a real good deal for the workers because the cost of living, it doesn't correspond with the cost of living. And those people, they pay a lot of cost, because one thing, eliminating the cost of living for is they don't even get a cost of living raise.
Yeah.
One thing, and they're going to lose a lot of benefits behind that.
That may be. Tony, the point that Bernie was making, and I think that this is an important point that the country needs to have a discussion about, is that about half the people in the United States, actually it's probably more like 70%. I don't have the percentage right in front of me, I'm sorry, but a very substantial portion of the people in the United States who are on Medicaid, the health insurance, free health insurance for poor people, well over half of them are working. The majority of them are working. And the same is true of people on food stamps. If you take children out of the equation, it's you know, an overwhelming percentage of people on food stamps, I mean 80, 90%, something like that. And these people qualify for food stamps and for housing assistance and for Medicaid because they are paid so little, which means that our taxes, your and my taxes, Tony, are being used to subsidize Medicaid and food stamps and other programs like that, which in turn are subsidizing Amazon and McDonald's and Burger King and all these other big companies that pay crap wages. And that, you know, and Bernie's point was if these companies are, and his argument, in fact, if these companies are not going to pay a living wage, starting at $15 an hour, if they're not going to pay that, we should raise their taxes to pay for the benefits that we're providing to the people who work for them so that they can continue to work for them for crap wages. And, you know, and that's the entire frame that Bernie put it in. Well, and the it's the right thing to do frame, too. It's the moral thing to do frame. And I think that first we have to have those conversations, don't you?
Right. Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, I support Bernie on that 110%.
Okay.
Awesome job he did. Yes.
Okay. Tony, thanks a lot for the call. It's good to hear from you, and thanks for listening to us down there in Texas. Michael in Caldwell, New Jersey. Hey, Michael, you wanted to talk about judicial review?
Hey, Tom, listen, I'm in your book, The Crash of 2016, you said there were 3 ways to undo the Citizens United decision. I'm referring to the second one. The second, I'm quoting your words here, the second is for the American people, the President, and Congress to understand the consequences of Citizens United and break with the court. And you mentioned Dred Scott's decision, passage of 3 amendments, passage of legislation clarifying the rights and a war. Can you explain to me how would that work in the case of Citizens United?
I'd have to go back and read that paragraph, Michael, to know exactly what I was thinking. But what I can tell you is that both Andrew Jackson and Abraham Lincoln set the precedent 3 times between the two of them of ignoring Supreme Court decisions. And
so basically, some people can ignore decisions and say, basically, the Supreme Court got it wrong, and you could like wage a campaign against the court by saying conservatives have got it all wrong, and maybe like
that's what Jackson and Lincoln did, but you know, in the case of Andrew Jackson, there were two Supreme Court decisions that he ignored. The first had to do with the Second National Bank. The court ruled that it was just fine to have the bank. Jackson shut it down anyway, and claiming that it was unconstitutional. And the second was the Trail of Tears. The court ruled that the relocation of Indians was illegal, and Jackson did that anyway, or initiated that. It was finished during the president who followed him. In the case of Abraham Lincoln, it was Dred Scott. It was the 1856 decision or 57 decision that said that African Americans could never become citizens of the United States. And you know, Lincoln overtly ignored that. And then, you know, with the Emancipation Proclamation, he went even a lot farther than that and fought a war over it, frankly.
Well, what would in the case be in regard to Citizens United? Do you just say, do you do an Article 3, Section 2 action, say the Supreme Court was mistaken and flawed?
Well, that's my recollection of when I wrote the book, is that was the argument that I was making, is that Article 3, Section 2 gives Congress the power to regulate the Supreme Court, and Congress can simply pass a law saying, you know, we are passing term limits, or excuse me, we are passing campaign finance reform, and the Supreme Court may not rule on this case. And you simply embed that. It's called court stripping. You embed that into the legislation. It's been done in a few cases. It's very controversial.
Well, why doesn't you think the Democrats will start doing that to blunt the power of the Supreme Court, or do you think they may take additional actions that may cause Chief Justice Roberts to focus more on judicial restraint instead of judicial activism? Because I'm quite certain that even the threat of adding additional justices would scare the body itself.
I would think so. That's what happened in 1937. I think in the current environment, the court basically has nothing to worry about, but because they've got a Republican president and Congress is in the hands of the Republicans. But by 2020, if the Democrats have achieved a supermajority in the House and the Senate and they can recapture the White House, and if Donald Trump and the Republican Party has been discredited, and the easiest way to do that, the thing that most people pay attention to, is not sex scandals, it's a crashing economy. And you know that when that's going to happen is the big question, not if. But if that was the case, and this court with Kavanaugh or Amy Coney Bryant or whoever Trump ends up putting on this court. If the court starts handing down these Lochner-era kind of decisions where they say child labor laws are unconstitutional, right to unionize laws are unconstitutional, Medicare and Social Security are unconstitutional, government-supported housing is unconstitutional. These are all decisions that the Supreme Court in the past has made. They have said exactly what I just said. And in 1937, Franklin Roosevelt scared the hell out of them by threatening to pack the court. And suddenly, one justice in particular, ironically, his name was Roberts, started changing his votes and going along.
Maybe additional pressure is necessary.
Yeah, well, this was pure political pressure.
Overall, maybe you can just add the seats that win, even if they do back down.
Yeah, there's a couple of ways to pull it off. One is through court stripping legislation. Another would be through an amendment to the Constitution, which is what Move to Amend and PDAmerica.org are working on. And the other, of course, is to and the final one is to seize control of enough control of the government that the next president who's appointing the next Supreme Court justices is a Democrat. Michael, thanks for the call. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's 15 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls on Anything Goes Friday right after this. And welcome back. 15 minutes past the hour. Michael in Pismo Beach, California. Hey, Michael. Thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's up?
You mean Michelle?
Michael, you are on the air. Oh, Michelle. I'm sorry. Yes, Michelle. Hey, Michelle.
Hi.
What's up?
It's actually Rochelle, but that's okay.
Oh, Rochelle. Wow, I got it wrong on twice. I'm sorry.
That's okay. I was listening yesterday, and maybe I didn't hear it correctly. I own a small wellness center, and I run labs on people all the time, and I'm beginning to see a rise in allergies to sesame seeds. And I've been wondering why. I thought it was because of vaccines, but I've been told by all the local doctors that that's not true. And then I didn't quite hear what you said. I wasn't sure if you said that you have seen this or...
No, what I was pointing out is that there are these aluminum compounds added to vaccines that are called adjuvants, which cause the immune system to go hysterical, essentially, cause the immune system to go on high alert. And so that hits the bloodstream, the immune system goes crazy, then along with that comes some fragments of, say, whooping cough virus, and the body goes, whooping cough, and mounts a massive, defense against it, and that is the basis for immunity. The problem is, and I was pointing out how I just got a flu vaccine a couple of days ago, but because I'm an old man, I got a flu vaccine that has no adjuvant in it. Instead, it has 4 times as much virus as the normal vaccine. It's called high-dose vaccine, but there's no adjuvant. And I like that because the problem with the adjuvants is if there are any other proteins floating around in your body at the time you get the adjuvant, you may develop an allergy to it, whether it is the examples I used yesterday were peanuts, in part because peanut oil is used as part of the manufacturing process for vaccines in the United States. Sesame oil is used as part of the manufacturing process for vaccines in the Middle East. And in the Middle East, they're seeing an explosion of anaphylactic type sesame oil allergies, whereas we're seeing an explosion of peanut oil kind of allergies. But also, if people, whatever the principal food that they're eating when they're getting the vaccine, may end up being the thing that they're allergic to, or some of the things that they're allergic to as they spend the rest of their lives. And this was not an issue before.
A lot of anaphylactic reactions to sesame seeds.
Yeah, well, sesame seeds are way more common in our food supply today than they were 40 years ago. So, and 40 years ago, and the other point that I made is growing up, I didn't know anybody who was as severely allergic as so many of the young people today are. And I think the reason
of the labs that we run, that's what we're seeing.
Right,
and have numerous allergies.
Oh yeah, and the reason why I believe, and I may be wrong on this, and people will say, oh, it's a crazy theory, and I'm not opposed to vaccines. I'm all in, as I said, I just got one yesterday, day before yesterday. But I am opposed to adjuvants and mercury-based preservatives. And when I was a kid, by the time I was 10 or 12, I had maybe a total of 5 or 6 shots. Vaccines. And today, by the time kids are 12, 14 years old, they've had, in some cases, as many as 30 vaccines. that's a huge dose of adjuvant that is cranking your immune system. And of course, the immune system's looking around going, okay, what stimulated me? What do I need to attack? And, oh, he ate some sesame seeds. I guess I'll go after that. I mean, you know, I believe that that's the mechanism. I'm sharing with you my own. It's not just my own theory. I mean, you can easily Google it. It's shared by lots and lots of other people. But I don't have the kind of science to back it up that I would like to have. But Michelle, I think your experience backs it up too. Michelle, thank you for the call. Excuse me, Rochelle, thank you for the call. We'll be right back. There was a new poll out from Public Affairs Council and Morning Consult. And what this poll found was that while the news media is trusted as a primary source for what's going on, 46% of Americans say they trust the news media, 71% of Americans said that they trust their friends and neighbors as a source of media more than the news media, 71%. Now, what that means is that you, as a Free Speech TV viewer, are well informed on what's going on, far more so than the average person. So you have an opportunity now to be the news source for your friends, your neighbors, your family, whether it's on Facebook or talking to people at the store or your next door neighbors or whatever it may be. And you have an opportunity to let them know about this great news source here. Free Speech TV. Tell them how they can find it. You can go to freespeech.org. You can find all the places where people can watch Free Speech TV. Thank you. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and Tom in Urbana, Illinois. Hey, Tom, what's on your mind?
Hello, Tom. It's nice to talk to you again. We listen to you on UPTV here in Urbana, Illinois.
Oh, cool.
One of the things I listened to today, you talked about all the forest fires that are going on, particularly in the west from the border of Mexico clear to the Canadian border and past. And I'm just curious. The Earth is a closed system, and there's only so much oxygen that's available. And I would imagine that the air that you and I breathe, the oxygen we need, is the same oxygen that's going into the fire. Now, I'm not an alarmist by nature, but I'm just curious. How much longer can we keep using up this oxygen, and the only thing left on the planet that can use it will be those that use CO2?
Well,
and we're not those people.
Yeah, yeah, I know. It's that would be plants. Let me reassure you, Tom. The amount of CO2 in the atmosphere is way less than 1%. The amount of oxygen in the atmosphere, if I'm remembering my high school biology or chemistry, is around 19 or 20%. And then the biggest chunk of the rest of the atmosphere is nitrogen. And so we've got lots of elbow room. We can do just fine in 17, 18% oxygen environments, for example. We may not, be super fine, but if you look at people who live at high elevations, they've got less oxygen available to them, and they can do just fine. They prosper. They may be shorter. I mean, look at the people who live in the Himalayas mountains and in the Peruvian mountains, and that may have something to do with not having enough oxygen to grow rapidly. I don't know, but other than that, I think the big concern is that the oxygen that is being used by these forest fires is being combined with the carbon in the trees.
Exactly.
And the byproduct of that is carbon dioxide. And we're now introducing carbon dioxide. We're adding 2.1 parts per million of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere every year. This is the fastest rate in history. We have never before added this much carbon dioxide to the atmosphere this rapidly. Well, I don't have all the numbers in front of me, so I'm not going to try and represent them. But that I know, and that's the real danger. It's not a matter of whether we can breathe or not. It's a matter of whether or not we can eat or drink. Because what's happening is, as the greenhouse gases increase, the atmosphere is holding more heat. As it holds more heat, you're going to have more intense storms. You're going to have more intense flooding. You're going to have more intense droughts, and thus fires. And the fires associated with them, right? And none of that is good for growing crops. Droughts are not. Flooding is not. And because our weather patterns are now routinely stalling out instead of moving because the jet stream is collapsing as a consequence of the warming of the Arctic, and it's going to get really bad when all the ice melts up there, which is probably going to happen in the next few years. When that happens, we're going to be in a world of hurt. I mean, we're already in a world of hurt, and global warming is already largely responsible for the so-called Arab Spring and all the unrest in the Middle East, you know, outside of George W. Bush wanting to get himself reelected and, you know, declaring war on Iraq and Afghanistan. But
exactly, I think Chris Hedges is right. We've just about run out of time.
Yeah, yeah. Amen. Tom, thanks a lot for the call. Very well said. Linda in Auburn, Washington. Hey, Linda, what's up?
Hi. I wanted to give you a quick idea how we can have verified, cheap, easy elections in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
I also do have an idea about what the gentleman before me just said, but I'll stick with this topic. So it is to model our system after what they do in Guadalajara, probably still. I know they did it like 30 years ago. So you get together in your neighborhood. A precinct is about 300 houses. So within a neighborhood, there they could go to a grocery store, I believe, and they would choose a person from each major political party who would count their votes. And if we did this, you know, in our neighborhood, if you had a mirror over what they're counting, you could use a red pen and make a mark. And if nobody knew what color you had used, you could see your vote was counted. Then they call that into a regional area, so you can then see it they would see it on a TV screen, but we could see it on a laptop. So each neighborhood, each precinct verifies their vote. You know your vote was counted, and we could do this even for polling. Even if we got together once a month, we could talk to neighbors and try to clear up if people have wrong information due to wrong news sources, or, you know,
Right.
Hopefully the idea would be that we would.
So, Linda, you know, I live in Oregon. In Oregon and Washington State, we have entirely vote by mail. You don't go to any place to vote. And, of course, there are some people who are saying, oh, well, that was an opportunity for civic engagement. I get that. But still, the votes are then counted on scanners, electronic scanners that, you know, that it's like, you know, an SAT test kind of thing. And the only complaint I have is that the scanners are owned by private for-profit corporations and programmed by them. I would much rather they were owned by the government and programmed by a government agency, and that all the software was open source. But if all the software was open source and the government owned the scanners, wouldn't a vote-by-mail scheme like the one I just described that is in place in Washington and Oregon State be the very easiest and best?
Well, we just don't really know if the vote got flipped later.
I'm sorry, Linda, it sounds like you've got your thumb over your microphone. Can you try that again?
Very nice. We just don't know if the vote would get flipped or not, but you could still do the ballot, but you could do this as a fallback, as our own poll, for example. But
okay. Well, it's an interesting idea. Linda, thank you for the call, and thanks for keep thinking. You know, we need more thinking here. Great ideas. It's 28 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Actually, according to my magic contraption here, it's 27 minutes, 30 seconds past the hour. I'm guessing that's right. We'll be right back. Our book today is How to Be Less Stupid About Race by Crystal M. Fleming. This is from page 28, in the chapter, The Idiot's Guide to Critical Race Theory. As stated previously, we live in a society where the phrase white supremacy has been traditionally used to refer to neo-Nazis and extremists, rather than the dominance of people socially defined as white. But legal scholars, social scientists, and political philosophers working in the robust field of critical race theory have developed conceptual tools for recognizing and responding to systemic racism and white supremacy. Critical race theory is an interdisciplinary body of scholarship that emerged in the aftermath of the civil rights movement as legal theorists grappled with naming and challenging the persistence of racism after the fall of de jure segregation at law. Born in the mid-1970s, CRT, critical race theory, it boldly embraced an overtly activist agenda, the promotion of racial justice and the eradication of racial oppression. Bridging legal analysis with storytelling and narratives centering the experiences of people of color, critical race theorists set out to unveil and address the persistence of racism and white dominance. And importantly, scholars in this tradition also acknowledge the intersections of racism with sexism, class oppression, and other systems of inequality. One of the most important and helpful features of critical race theory is the clear analysis of white supremacy in the so-called post-civil rights era, a period in U.S. history when politicians and the majority population increasingly portrayed themselves as beyond race or non-racist. Critical race theory is kryptonite for the myth of colorblindness and helps cut through the BS of post-racial propaganda by specifying the role of social institutions, especially laws and legal practices, in reproducing racism. From a critical race perspective, the United States is not and never was a benevolent nation of immigrants. Rather, it is a nation of settler colonialism, genocide, white nationalism, racial slavery, legal torture, and institutionalized rape. Since the inception of this country, laws and legal practices systematically favored whites economically, politically, and socially. In fact, critical race scholar Cheryl Harris in 1993 described whiteness as a form of protected property within the U.S. racial hierarchy, a category of privilege tied to the accumulation of economic resources and the subjugation of racialized others. From this perspective, laws and legal institutions within this country have continually converted white identity into a valuable, exclusive mechanism for maintaining power. Few people realize that the nation's first immigration law, the Naturalization Act of 1790, was explicitly white supremacist, restricting naturalization to free white persons, though white women were let out of this exclusionary understanding of freedom. Granting citizenship to free white men was quite literally a government handout for whites only. As you might have noticed, history keeps coming up here, quite simply because critical race theorists encourage historical consciousness. In order to understand present-day racial realities, we have to look to the past. That might seem obvious on its face, but the sad truth is that most U.S. citizens have never seriously studied history of any kind, much less racial history. Yet the vast majority of the population is ignorant of our racist past. How can they understand the impact of that past on the present? Critical race theorists also challenge the liberal logics that have been used to portray the United States as beyond race, for example, by analyzing the jurisprudence surrounding the country's alternative action policies. Scholars such as Richard Delgado, Kimberly Crenshaw, and Derek Bell, the last of whom was a professor at Barack Obama's Harvard Law School, have shown that legal assumptions about meritocracy and fairness that are used by conservatives to undermine affirmative action programs are logically inconsistent with the existence of institutionalized racism. Other scholars have taken a critical or systemic approach to the study of racism, who have shown that the nation's first affirmative action programs and government handouts were conceived by white Americans for white Americans. From using racially justified mass murder, land theft, and labor exploitation to enacting racist citizenship laws, people socially defined as white have built generations of wealth and political power by playing the race card and founding an entire nation on white identity politics. To take just one example, the 1862 Homestead Act gleefully gave away millions of acres of stolen land almost exclusively to whites. And quiet as it's kept, white people continue to be the #1 beneficiaries of affirmative action today. Race scholars are aware that white women are the top recipients of affirmative action, but few have considered that white women's primary access to affirmative action helps maintain the racial wealth gap. Because these white women typically marry white men, their affirmative action benefits are channeled toward their white families. And their access to affirmative action benefits, preferential hiring, and federal diversity initiatives not only helps them, but also bolsters the socioeconomic status of white families broadly. My first serious encounter with critical race theory occurred after I'd finished my PhD. Although I didn't realize it then, I had chosen to undertake my graduate work in a sociology department. How to Be Less Stupid About Race by Crystal Fleming.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. A group of congressmen and women have just sent a letter to President Trump, to Donald Trump. It is signed at the very top by Mark Pocan and Raul Grijalva, the co-chairs of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, and then also by Pramila Jayapal, Jan Schakowsky, Nydia Valquez. It just goes on and on. Jamie Raskin, Barbara Lee. Some of the other Adam Smith, some of the other relatively high Ted Lieu profile. And basically what this letter says is if Kavanaugh becomes a member of the Supreme Court, Eleanor Holmes Norton used to be my representative to the extent that she can represent by law. Earl Blumenauer of here in Oregon, he's one of them. Zoe Lofgren, Danny Davis, Karen Bass. Anyhow, what they're saying is that we will use our subpoena power as members of the House of Representatives if we get a majority in the House of Representatives to investigate Brett Kavanaugh's perjury. And then they list a bunch of, perjured statements, lies that he made. I think this is fascinating. Bill in St. Helens, Oregon. Hey, Bill, what's up?
Hey, Tom. That day on the Facebook, someone asked a question. They said, geez, the only way the founders allowed us to hold the government accountable is through the ballot box. And somebody responded saying, yes, because it's about checks and balances. Each of the branches are supposed to check and balance the other and keep them under control, and they're supposed to self-police to some extent. So I guess my point is, so we now have the executive branch colluding, unquestionably, with the legislative branch to pack the judicial branch.
Yep.
Where are the checks and balances, Tom? Where's the representative government?
They're not there, and we haven't, we really haven't had representative government, I would say, since the late 70s, after the Buckley decision, and which paved the way for the rise of Ronald Reagan. So
that's it. I've just lost all faith. I just don't know why this is not the national conversation. Let's stop fighting each other and start talking.
Yeah, it really should be, Bill. And the problem is that what you're looking at is the billionaire takeover of the United States. And these same billionaires, the same group of billionaires, are very, very influential with the media. In many cases, own much of the media. Rupert Murdoch is part of this billionaire cabal. The people who own some of the biggest ISPs and media companies in this country, or are the major stockholders thereof, are part of this. And they don't want that conversation. So that conversation is not going to happen. I mean, every day I'm wondering, okay, how many millions of dollars did the Koch brothers spend on television advertising today? I think that would be news, right? I guarantee if it was George Soros writing a $300 million check for this election, it would be all over the media. But, no, they don't want to talk about it. But, Bill, your point is really well taken. Thank you. It's a very well-made argument. Jeff in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Jeff, what's up? Thanks for listening to X-Ray FM.
Well, thanks for taking my call, Tom. I want to talk about Kavanaugh, but first, if I may, a lot of you and a lot of callers today have been talking about the political landscape in West Virginia. I just want to mention that Michael Moore's new film has a really good segment on a progressive Democrat there. I don't know his name, but he talks about the successful teacher strike and the state's long history of union organizing. So I highly recommend Michael's new film, not just for that.
Yeah, I agree. Fahrenheit 11/9. And also on Twitter, somebody responded to that caller saying, no, that was not an anti-Hillary vote, the vote for Bernie. People loved Hillary, too. It was, but it was definitely a pro-Bernie vote. Anyhow, so that's not the point that you wanted to make, Jeff.
Yeah, so Kavanaugh, number one, it's not over till it's over. So let's bring the noise and keep the heat on till the final vote. And number two, I thought it was particularly rich, Tom, that Kavanaugh used the phrase search and destroy in describing we who are opposed to him are what we're doing to him. It's been exactly 27 years since Anita Hill testified against Clarence Thomas. And starting with Anita Hill going forward to Dr. Ford, allow me to name some prominent women in the intervening years whose characters and careers the GOP has sought to destroy. If you remember, Tom, right after they went after Miss Hill, they turned their ire to Candace Bergen and her fictional TV character Murphy Brown. Soon after that, it was Hillary Clinton's turn. followed by Monica Lewinsky, who bore their wrath thanks in no small part to this very same Brett Kavanaugh, who, as you've said, has insisted at that time Ken Starr included the most sordid details and language in his report. And then in the 2000s, they went after their favorite target was Nancy Pelosi, of course, but don't forget what they did to the Dixie Chicks. You know, tarred and feather them, no pun intended. Fast forward to the last couple of years, and you know, we've seen Trump's vicious attacks on Rosie O'Donnell, Meryl Streep, Maxine Waters, Carmen Yulin Cruz, et cetera, et cetera.
What's her name from Fox News?
Yeah, feel free to add to the list.
Yeah, the reporter.
And you and your callers add to the list. But you know, search and destroy is what they do. It's who they are. And what they do to strong women who dare to speak out is what they want to do to all of us, Tom. They like you say, they've got their sights set on destroying Social Security and Medicare now. Their view of nature, talking about Ronald Reagan, their environmental protection philosophy is summed up by his one phrase: "You've seen one redwood, you've seen them all."
Right.
So, you know, thanks for shining your light, Tom, and let's keep fighting, because really life on Earth as we know it depends on us keeping up the fight and not giving in to despair.
Amen. And write this phone number down, 202-224-3121. It gets you to the Senate switchboard, and then you can ask for your senators. Jeff, thank you. You're absolutely right. This ain't over yet. Kathleen in Astoria, New York. Hey, Kathleen, what's up? Thanks for watching us on Facebook Live.
Hi. Let me just turn off my speaker. Can you hold? Sorry about that.
It's okay.
Hello. Sorry about that.
What's up?
Yes, I was planning on watching Mahmoud Abbas' speech at the General Assembly, and I wound up getting glued to C-SPAN watching the testimony, Kavanaugh and Ford, and totally drowned out a voice that is not heard readily in the media today anyway. What's going on in Palestine, the cuts to their humanitarian aid while Israel's aid is going up, all of that's being drowned out. And Trump comes along saying that he's for a two-state solution, but what kind of a state would it be?
Right.
I mean, he's
Swiss
doing
cheese.
everything opposite.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a joke. Trump is saying Jared Kushner, who, it's like, who as a child, Bibi Netanyahu used to stay at Bibi Netanyahu's house. Jared Kushner did as a child. I mean, these very, very wealthy and powerful men hang out together, right? And
but why is the media not covering it on? I mean, Channel 7 or ABC or CNN?
I don't know, Kathleen. There are so many things the media should be covering. They should also be covering the atrocities in Yemen. It's the worst human rights crisis in the world right now, and it's because of U.S. munitions and U.S. refueling of Saudi jets, which were bought from the United States.
And that Saudi Arabia is turning a blind eye when basically they used to boycott goods in America that had to do with working with Israel or import, like Coca-Cola.
No, Saudi Arabia,
they boycotted them.
Saudi Arabia, Netanyahu, Mohammed bin Salman, the prince, the functional king of Saudi Arabia, and Netanyahu have, I think, figured out that as right-wing leaders, authoritarian right-wing leaders, they have more in common than they have in opposition through being, Muslim or Jewish. And, they're developing an alliance against the Shia, against Iran, which is, in my opinion, Israel's being played for suckers here by the Saudis on this thing. The Saudis, who apparently just kidnapped one of their journalists. The Washington Post today has a big empty column on one of their, I believe it's on the front page of their opinion section, that because this fellow whose name is escaping me, Khashoggi, I think.
Adnan Khashoggi?
Yeah, Adnan Khashoggi. He went to a Saudi embassy in some country, Lebanon or wherever it was, and with his wife or girlfriend. She stood outside. He was just going in to get his paperwork done, and he vanished.
He vanished. My God.
Yeah, he's apparently been kidnapped.
He was one of the richest oil billionaires in the world.
Yeah, and he's well, I may have the wrong guy, but but I think not. But he's been an outspoken critic of the Saudi government, and apparently critic no more. It appears that he has been kidnapped.
Wow.
Again, I may have the wrong name. Check out the Washington Post. There's a piece about it.
Oh, okay.
But Kathleen, we're not talking about any of these things. It's all about, and for that matter, with regard to Kavanaugh.
Also I think Trump announced that he was going to give the Saudis nuclear weaponry information.
Yeah.
You know?
No, it's nuts. And then you know, Brett Kavanaugh, the Supreme Court put on their calendar the day after Kennedy announced that he was going to retire. The Supreme Case put a case on their calendar called Gamble. I think it's Gamble versus the United States. And in this case, this Gamble case, the argument is that basically the effect of it will be, this doesn't have to do with the pardon specifically, but roughly 150 years ago, the Supreme Court ruled that if you are prosecuted by the federal government and you win, you are not successfully prosecuted, that the single exception to double jeopardy in the Fifth Amendment is that state governments can still prosecute you because they're completely different jurisdictions. And so it's not really double jeopardy. And as a result of that, if Donald Trump pardons Paul Manafort or Michael Flynn or his own son and says, you know, here's a federal pardon for you, right now, the state of New York can still prosecute them for tax evasion or for whatever, you know, for whatever they did. If this decision is decided the way it looks like at least the 4 right-wingers on the court want it decided, Trump's pardon will be final, and state courts and state attorneys general will not be able to go after somebody who's been pardoned by the president. And literally, they put that case on the court the day after Kennedy said, "I'm out of here," you know, in anticipation of Kavanaugh coming on, knowing that he would be supportive of it. You know, there's all these things. There's that. There's his take on abortion and Roe v. Wade. There's his take on presidential power, I guess, which is a dimension of that. There's his take on workers' rights. He doesn't think workers should have any rights, essentially. You know, in the SeaWorld decision, he was the lone judge who said that the woman who was killed at SeaWorld shouldn't be able to, you know, have the $75,000 claim against SeaWorld. Her family shouldn't, because she should have known how dangerous the job was, et cetera. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. I mean, he's opposed to any kind of employee protections. We're not talking about any of these things. Sex subsumes everything. And that's a problem with our media. It's a problem, frankly, I think, with our culture, with our society, that we've got to get a handle on. I mean, you know, sex is a big deal, and the exploitation and abuse of women is a big deal and needs to be addressed. But there are also other dimensions to this that are really, really big. And the media doesn't seem to want to talk about any of it. Kathleen, thank you for the call, and thanks for watching us on Facebook. We'll be right back. It's 46 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be back with more of your calls right after this. Stick around. In the last sentence, I was talking about Adnan Khashoggi. It's actually Jamal Khashoggi, who is the reporter who has been kidnapped. Adnan, I don't know if it's the same name or if he's a relative or what the deal is, but this is a 59-year-old veteran journalist who's lived in self-imposed exile in the United States since Prince Mohammed's rise to power. He was in Turkey. He went to a consulate to get the paperwork done so he could marry his fiancée, who is Turkish, and he never came out. The Saudi consulate says, "Oh, yeah, he left our building." And his fiancée is like, "I stood out in front all day and all night and half the next day." And he never came out. So anyhow, just to clarify all this stuff. Jim in Los Angeles. Hey, Jim, what's on your mind? Thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV.
Hey, Tom.
Hey, Jim. What's up?
My friend, geez, what a crazy world, as you say. I think your first guest encapsulated what I try to say, my 30 seconds to 3 minutes every week, which really has been my lifetime. I haven't, just trying to survive. I haven't been able, but that's what I want to say is count your vote. Make sure your vote is counted. And gosh darn it, there are repercussions. If people miscount your votes, if people deliberately, they should go to jail.
Well, and this is, and the last time that we saw this in a big way was Volusia County, Florida in 2000, where Al Gore's vote count actually went backwards. It went down as Bush's vote count went up. in this little county in Florida, and you know the world watched. And, you know, we still don't know what happened or why because the Supreme Court shut down the investigation. So spot on, Jim. You know, very, very well said. Michael in Princeton, Minnesota. Hey, Michael, what's up?
Hello, Tom.
Hey, Michael.
Yeah, I was listening to TV this morning, and they said that it was Senator Cornyn that said that they treated that Miss Blasey Ford the way that he would like to see his daughter treated. If he turns around and votes yes on Kavanaugh, that means that he's calling his daughter a liar. And I tried to call his number.
Right.
So I called the Congress hotline, you know, the one that you give on the TV. And I found out that, you know, when you call in there, they ask for your zip code.
Right.
If you don't give them your zip code and they ask for it 3 times, it'll take you to a human being. And then you can request the senator. Now, I live in Minnesota, so one of my senators is Klobuchar.
Right.
I don't have to lobby her for anything. I mean,
she's good. Yeah.
And so in order to get to his phone, I just held on the line, and then I asked for his number. Do you know when it goes through the main switchboard, does it turn around and send my area code so that he knows I'm not in his district? Or
yes, although a lot of people these days, I mean, I have a 503 number because I live in Portland, or because I got a phone here, my own personal cell phone. You know, the most recent one was 10, 12 years ago. But I lived in D.C. for years with the 503 area code. They don't worry so much about the area code. They're looking for the zip code. They want to, you know, because people move and they keep their same phone numbers and their same cell phone numbers. But yeah, it does. The caller ID does go all the way through. It goes all the way through at every stage. They know who you, you know, at least what your phone number is, unless you're blocking it. Michael, thanks for the call. We'll be right back. There was a new poll out from Public Affairs Council and Morning Consult. And what this poll found was that while the news media is trusted as a primary source for what's going on, 46% of Americans say they trust the news media, 71% of Americans said that they trust their friends and neighbors as a source of media more than the news media, 71%. Now, what that means is that you, as a Free Speech TV viewer, are well informed on what's going on, far more so than the average person. So you have an opportunity now to be the news source for your friends, your neighbors, your family, whether it's on Facebook or talking to people at the store or your next door neighbors or whatever it may be. And you have an opportunity to let them know about this great news source here, Free Speech TV. Tell them how they can find it. You can go to freespeech.org. You can find all the places where people can watch Free Speech TV. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, picking up your phone calls. And Paul in Woodinville, Washington. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind?
Well, you started to mention a little bit about it. My topic is, what is to become of the allegations against Brett Kavanaugh?
Which allegations? You mean the sexual assault allegation?
Yeah.
Okay.
And, you know, we have to look at this, at least the senators ought to. This is not a matter of beyond a reasonable doubt. It's not even a matter of preponderance of the evidence. It's a matter of sufficient doubt.
Right.
Sufficient doubt as in playing Russian roulette. Russian roulette is 1 in 6 or 1 in 8. No one would do that, right?
Right.
We're talking percentages that are very low. And I would say that regardless of Christine Blasey Ford's testimony, set that aside, his own testimony left plenty of doubt.
Yeah, which is why the ABA has reopened their inquiry into whether his downgrade to merely qualified status should be downgraded further.
Well, and 2,500 law professors have signed an open letter against his nomination, against his confirmation. And 2,500, by the way, this was on another program, is 15% of all the law professors in the country, because there's only about 17,000 of them.
Wow. I was wondering about the context. That's fascinating.
But this is what I wanted to talk about. Why I started thinking, what's to become of this? There's an article in the National Review that says, well, you remember the book Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird, where a black man was accused of raping a white woman.
Right.
And the movie, Gregory Peck played Atticus Finch, who successfully defended the black man. They're saying if we are in this context, Atticus Finch would be a rape denier. So they're playing racism against sexual assault.
Well, this is my point in my first hour rant, Paul, where I was going off on, you've got 4 different Fox hosts now who have said that this is all because Kavanaugh's a white man. And so, okay, who's going after the white man? Well, there's only 2 people of color on the Senate Judiciary Committee. They're both Democrats. One's a man, one's a woman, Cory Booker and Kamala Harris. Is that what they're saying? I haven't been watching Fox News, so I don't know if they're showing, black senators when they say this. But, racializing this is insane.
Well, let's look at Anita Hill. We essentially left her hung out to dry.
Yeah.
Democrats were in control of the Senate at the time. And so what happened then? It was race played against sexual harassment.
Yeah, and Joe Biden has since apologized for that.
We have to put a black on the court because a black man just died and left the court.
Yeah.
So it's insane. And this is what, now we have, I'm very frustrated, Tom, because we have a white woman being alleging sexual assault against a black. It's not even sexual assault. When you count him covering her airway, that's just plain first-degree felony assault.
Right.
Okay, but we have this. These are 2 white people, and 53% of white women voted for Trump. I don't know how to advocate for women when that's what happens. 53% is not all of the women. 53% of white women is not all the women. Obviously, the majority of women, but that was made up by women of color.
Yeah, it was only 3% of black women voted for Trump, as I recall. And
right.
and this was, by the way, Paul, and let's remind each other and our audience, this was after the Access Hollywood tape came out, in which Trump bragged about grabbing women by the crotch and bragged about sexual assault and said, when you're a star, they let you do it, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, this is what he.
And so, are we going to leave Christine Blasey Ford hung out to dry? The only way it seems to me to continue this investigating these allegations is for enough people to get off of their snitty whatever and start voting. And if we can take control of the House of Representatives, then they can open up hearings.
That's right.
Continue looking into this. But otherwise, this is just going to evaporate. And we're going to be in the same position. This should not be happening 27 years after Clarence Thomas.
Well, and remember, after Clarence Thomas was put on the court, and again, Democrats controlled Congress, there was no follow-up on those hearings. And,
right.
Anita Hill, it took her years.
That happen? And the other thing is, black people being subject to every kind of injustice, especially black men being shot, unarmed black men, and blacks vote in very small numbers.
Yeah, well, that's, part of that is the legacy of Jim Crow. But yeah, we all need to be. Young people are not voting. Basically, the only minority group that Trump wants to go after who vote heavily are older people, and even there, he's suppressing the vote. Paul, thanks a lot for the call. Always good to hear from you. It's 57, and you say it so well. It's 57. Oh, it's the end of the show. Okay. I thought we'd have another hour. Anyhow, thanks so much for being with me today. Hope you have a great weekend, a calm and blessed and comfortable weekend. And don't forget, democracy depends on you. Get out there, get active, tag. You're it. Not a spectator sport, eh? See you on Monday.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
From UN headquarters in New York, I'm Luke Vargas with your World in